2. This is live, ladies and gentlemen. And this is a very unusual podcast we're going to have here and a very unusual discussion. I have to my left Michael Shermer, very famous skeptic. He's been on the podcast before. Of course, Randall Carlson, amazing gentleman who knows far too much about terrifying things like asteroids. And Graham Hancock, author, also a fantastic human being, many times been on this podcast as well. And this all came out of a podcast that Randall and Graham and I did recently, and Michael Shermer commented on it, and it was all essentially on the hypothesis that the great extinction that happened with the North American land animals that happened somewhere around the end of the Ice Age, and the end of the Ice Age, the abrupt end of the Ice Age, being caused, please correct me if I fuck any of this up, being caused by a comet impact. Michael Shermer had some questions about that, and we said this would be an amazing podcast to get everybody together in a room and go over this. Since then, there's been some interesting stuff that's happened. Well, I thought this was really fascinating that Forbes has a mainstream article in Forbes, did a comet wipe out Ice Age megafauna? And this is actually from just a couple of weeks ago. And then there was also this interpretation that's fairly recent as well about one of the stone tablets, one of the stone carvings rather, on Göbekli Tepe. And Graham, you would probably be the best to describe that.
Yeah, that was published in Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, peer-reviewed journal, by a couple of scientists from the University of Edinburgh, and they are proposing an interpretation of the Göbekli Tepe imagery. There's quite a lot of imagery on those T-shaped pillars, particularly one pillar, pillar 43 in enclosure D. And their deduction, what they take from their interpretation, of course many will disagree with them, their interpretation is that those images are speaking of the comet impact. They're speaking of a comet that hit the Earth roughly 12,900 years before our time.
And Randall, this has been something that you've been obsessed with for many, many years now. We've documented it and detailed it in many conversations that we've had on the podcast.
Yes. Now, I can't say that I'm that familiar with that article. I haven't had a chance to get into it. So
but this idea that the comet impact is what has caused the end of the Ice Age.
Well, it's so complex, but now what we do is we throw some type of an impact into the mix, and it seems to fill gaps
Pull this right up to you.
It seems to fill gaps that were, at this point, still unexplained. There's varying theories between some extent of climate change and some extent of human predation that caused the extinction. And I've always felt like you can't blame it on one or the other. I think humans probably had a role, but only in the very final stages of the extinction event. And one of the scenarios would certainly suggest that there were extreme climate changes between what's called the Balling-Alarod, which was the rather gradual warming at the very end of the Pleistocene, which was then followed by the Younger Dryas, which was the return to full glacial cold, and then the end of the Younger Dryas, which is dated at about 11,600, which is considered now to be the boundary of the Holocene. Post Younger Dryas, pre-Boreal it's called, would be the beginning of the Holocene. And it seems that most of the extinctions did occur between roughly 13,000 and 11,600 years ago, although the dating has a wide spread on it, so you can't pinpoint it down to a specific event. But I've always felt like that there had to be something we needed to look at that triggered the extreme climate changes that we do see at the end of the Ice Age. And to my opinion, you can't attribute that solely to Milankovitch theories, which is basically the changing solar terrestrial geometries, because they're too slow. And what we see at the end of the Ice Age were very rapid climate changes. And so one of the things that I think has been missing has been the trigger. Wallace Brecker pointed out years ago that possibly a major flood from the draining of Lake Agassiz caused an interruption of the thermohaline circulation, which is basically the circulation of the North Atlantic Ocean, and that this might have been what triggered the Younger Dryas and then also contributed to the mass extinction events. But now I think that the dating of the draining of Lake Agassiz is too late for that, and was probably a latter event within the overall melting phenomena that occurred between roughly 14,600 and about 11,000 years ago. Somewhere in there we have to fit that mass extinction event, and I definitely have thought that climate change was the dominant factor in that. But then what triggered the climate change? That always seemed to me to be something that was not ever really explained. The comet impact theory is very controversial, but the evidence has been steadily mounting now for a decade.
Including physical evidence, right? Like the core samples that show nuclear glass scattered out throughout Asia and Europe at roughly the same time period when they do the core samples.
Yes, most of it's dating to 12,800 to 13,000 years ago.
These are called impact proxies.
Yeah.
Impact proxies.
Nanodiamonds, melt glass, microspherules. These kind of things are associated with impact, not necessarily always caused by impact. So this has been part of the reason for the controversy. But it's the abundance of all of these at a particular level which leads a large group of scientists.
Oh, who's the boss?
to have had a comet impact.
Oh no.
It's the
Oh, no.
full
Oh,
assemblage
no.
of things that is difficult to explain by processes without invoking some type of a cosmic event.
And it also corresponds with what you believe is a period where Earth travels through a series of comets.
Well, this gets us to the ideas of what would be called the British neo-catastrophists, Victor Clube and William Napier and a number of others that have theorized that from time to time Earth encounters debris from a large disintegrating comet. And there's an interesting, William Napier addresses this in an interesting article I can pull up here pretty soon, that possibly around 13,000 years ago, Earth may have encountered some of the debris from a disintegrating comet, which ultimately goes back to Fred Whipple, who is one of the godfathers of cometary science.
Could I just come in on that for a second?
Yeah.
I mean, specifically, Bill Napier, Victor Clube are identifying the remnants of this comet with the Littoral meteor stream, which is familiar, I think, to everybody. We pass through it twice a year. We see meteorites, particularly at the end of October, early November. That debris stream is still there. It still contains, according to their argument, bits of the comet. There are large objects in it, like Comet Encke, Niki, or Giotto, and so on, 4 or 5 kilometers in diameter. And the suggestion is that the meteor stream, it's got lots of small bits of dust, but it's got some larger stuff too, and some of that stuff fell out of the meteor stream 12,800 years ago and impacted primarily the North Americans.
Now, Michael, when you listened to that podcast, you had some questions. You are a professional skeptic, so of course you're skeptical. What are your thoughts about all this?
Yeah, let me pull back and give a bigger picture. After the podcast, I went and got the book, Magicians of the Gods, and actually I listened to it on audio. So it's 16, 18 hours of Graham reading with his wonderful British accent, which is, for Americans, that elevates the quality of the argument by an order of magnitude.
Yeah, that's how they sell things in infomercials over here.
And Graham, you're a good writer. It's a very compelling story.
Thank you. You're a great skeptic.
And so I think a number of points about, in general, the idea of alternative archaeology, which is really what we're talking about here. I prefer that to pseudo-archaeology because that's supposed to be a little bit of an insult. So alternative archaeology. So it's good to remember that you have these guys on the podcast for 3 or 4 hours, and the audience listening thinks, yeah, why don't these guys get a fair hearing? I mean, it's like there's the mainstream and then there's these guys.
Right.
But there isn't just these guys. There's hundreds of alternative archaeological theories. So which one gets the play, which one gets attention, which one doesn't? And for a mainstream archaeologist who's busy in the field and trying to get grants and so on, they mostly just don't have the time to sort through all these alternative theories, because this is just one, and as we'll see in the next couple hours, there's hundreds and hundreds of things to be addressed. So that's kind of what we do. So just to rattle off a few: the lost tribes of Israel who colonized the Americas, Mormon archaeology, explanation of Native Americans, the Kensington rune stones in Minnesota, the Vikings had come Black Egyptian hypothesis. When I was in graduate school, this book called Black Athena was published, that the Egyptians were actually black, and that the sort of Western white male dominance of history had written them out of the past. So this was a whole alternative history, alternative archaeology. Piltdown Man, Thor Heyerdahl, and his hypothesis that the Polynesian islands were colonized by South Americans who went east to west. That's since been debunked, but that's yet another one of these things. South American archaeology, Olmec statues seem to have like African features on them. So maybe Africans went directly across to South America. So there's, Eric Van Doniken, Zechariah Sitchin. Now most of these Graham rejects in his book, to your credit. So you're a good skeptic too. But for an outsider, to an anthropologist from Mars who steps into this thing cold, doesn't know anything, he's like, well, they're all alternative, which is the right one, and how do we know? And so what the way it works in science is the default position is the skeptical position. We assume your hypothesis is not true, not just you, anybody's hypothesis, like the Klug-Napier hypothesis. That was widely published. It was widely covered in mainstream scientific journals and popular science magazines like Scientific American, and it has not fared that well over the last decade or so. It's still around, it's still debated, but so you put it in the mainstream through peer-reviewed journals, and then you go to conferences and you have it out, and that's kind of where we end up with, well, this is what we think is probably true for now. And then all these other people out here, if they don't jump into the pool where everybody is, then there's no way for an outsider to know whether these alternative things have any validity or not, other than they make a compelling case in a popular book, yes, but what do the mainstream scientists think? So, and the problem is that so a couple of specific things, like what I call patternicity, the tendency to find meaningful patterns at random noise, the Virgin Mary on a grilled cheese sandwich or whatever. Those are fun examples, but taking pictoglyphs and then comparing them to constellations, like here we have some constellations on your roof here. It's easy in the mind's eye to find a pattern. The question is, did those people really think 10,000 years ago, 5,000 years? So this is a field called archaeoastronomy. Ed Krupp, the director of the Griffith Observatory here in LA, this is what he does. And sometimes he thinks the patterns mean something, sometimes they're totally random. Or you take something like the pyramids, as Graham knows, there's 100 theories about the pyramids. And there's the mainstream one, and then there's all these other ones. And this is why people like the director there, just can't deal with them all. So just as one example I used in my book, Why People Believe Weird Things, that one guy calculated that if you divide the height of the pyramid into twice the side of the base, you get the number close to pi. And then he just sort of works all these different numbers, so therefore it's cosmically significant.
Well, Richard Hoagland was like the best example of that,
Yes,
right? He would find these patterns in Mars and claim that if you go from this rock to half the distance, and why would you do that? That doesn't make any sense. He would create these patterns.
Right, and that's okay. I mean, all scientists look for patterns. So to take climate change, either the Earth is getting warmer, or it's not. Either it's human caused or it's not. There's a pattern in the data. You can see the pattern. The question is the pattern real? So this is why we use the term climate consensus. It's not a democracy. It's not like we voted on it and decided this is the truth. It's that independently, all these different scientists working in different fields, publishing in different journals, come to the same conclusion. So we call this consilient science or convergence of evidence science. That it's not like these guys are meeting on the weekends going, boy, we got to combat those crazy right-wingers with our data. They're independently coming to these conclusions. So that lifts our confidence that, there's probably something to their theory, such that there's now so much data converted to this, you'd have to deconstruct every one of those independent lines. So then you have things like what I call the problem of the residue of anomalies. In any field, there are residue of anomalies we can't explain. So like UFOs, for example. Ufologists, and me, a skeptic, agree that 90 to 95% of all the UFO sightings are explained by natural phenomena. Venus, swamp gas, airplanes, geese, whatever.
What was
they
that?
know that. And so we're really only talking about 5%. How do you explain that one's right there in 1967 on June 3rd? I don't know. No one knows that one. And then from there they build, well, that's my case. Then
Right.
if you can't explain that, then I have a case. No.
Well, that's very different than what we're talking about here.
Yeah,
though,
how
right?
is
No,
that, how is that
actually,
relevant
no,
to
it's-
us here?
It's totally relevant because I think almost all of your argument is based on this residue of anomalies, what we call the God of the gaps argument. If you scientists can't explain, this particular rock right here or that particular petroglyph, then I'm going to count that toward my compilation of data to support my hypothesis of a lost civilization.
But no one is saying that the scientists can't explain it. What essentially, particularly Randall with this series of images has shown, is that what you have here is something that can be explained by rapid melting of the ice caps. And Randall, step in.
No.
Well, just
Okay, go ahead if you want.
What?
Well, they
I
do
gotta keep my
say,
speed.
I mean, it depends what you mean by rapid. A glacial dam that, as our geologist will tell us in a moment, that breaks, that's fairly rapid. Back in '96, there was a very popular book called The Noah's Flood. This was a serious book by two geologists that said it was the rapid filling up of the Black Sea that swamped over the civilizations living on the edges of this, and that's where the Noachian flood story comes from. Okay, so it was widely debated and so on, and since it hasn't fared that well. Yeah, but that's
Oh,
fairly
I gotta
rapid. We're
jump in.
talking over the course of weeks or months or years. To a geologist, thousands of years is rapid. So, an impact by a comet happens in a couple hours or a couple of days or weeks versus a couple of months or years.
What?
What do we
Like,
mean
come
by
on.
rapid?
Okay, well, what are you saying then?
Okay.
So what are you saying about their theories in particular?
Okay, so the problem, I think, Graham, the deepest problem is much of your theory depends on negative evidence. That is, I don't accept the mainstream explanation for the pyramids, the Sphinx, the Machu Picchu, whatever.
Well, let's not talk about that. Let's just talk about this specific subject because it's going to take a long time just to
Yeah,
cover
okay, all right. So I'll just
asteroidal
hit to
impacts.
all right. So my final point is the falsifiability one. That is, what would it take to refute your hypothesis? Like, for me, the answer would be, like, if Göbekli Tepe turned out to be what you think it might have been, the place where advanced ancient civilization once inhabited or they used it. Where are the metal tools? Where are the writing, the examples of writing?
Perhaps a decision was made not to use metal. Perhaps a decision was
Oh.
made that errors had taken place. That in reinventing civilization, we shouldn't perhaps go down quite the same route as before. Perhaps writing isn't always an advance. Perhaps an oral tradition which records in memory, which enhances and uses the power of memory, may be a very effective way of dealing with information. We regard writing as an advance, and I can see lots of reasons why it is an advance, but if we put ourselves into the heads of ancient peoples, maybe it wasn't. I mean, there's a tradition from ancient Egypt that the god Thoth, god of wisdom, was the inventor of writing, but we have a text in which he is questioned by a pharaoh who is saying, well, actually, have you really done a good thing by introducing writing? Because then the words may roam around the world without wise advice to put them into context. And what will happen to memory when people?
What?
So
Come
there might be a
on.
choice not to go
Okay,
that way.
all right, but then what do you mean by advanced? When you say there used to be a lost advanced civilization before 10,000 years ago,
Well, let's just
what do you
pause
mean?
here for a second because what we know for a fact is that the carbon dating in all the area around Göbekli Tepe is somewhere around 12,000 years. Is that correct?
11,600 years ago
Okay,
is
so-
the
Hey,
earliest
man,
they
look.
found so far, but a great deal of Göbekli Tepe is still underground.
How are you going?
So at least what we know is
What's up here?
someone built some pretty impressive structures 11,600 years ago.
7,000 years before Stonehenge.
so when that story broke, this
I am
was
gorgeous.
long
That's
before
okay.
you came along with your book, it was controversial in the sense that we thought hunter-gatherers could not do something like this because to do that you need a large population with a division of labor and so forth. And so what the response to archaeologists was, well, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers. Maybe they can do more stuff than we gave them credit for. So why is that not a reasonable hypothesis versus it was actually advanced, but we mean something completely different by advanced, not writing and metal and technology. We mean, I don't know what you mean. What do you mean?
Well, I mean, we have a body of archaeology which goes on for decades, which is saying that megalithic sites, for example, Gigantea in Malta or Hagareim or Menidra. Megalithic sites date to no older than 5.5 to 6,000 years old. Gigantea would push it close to 6,000 years old. And there are no older sites than that, and therefore the megalithic site is associated with a certain stage of Neolithic development. Then along comes Göbekli Tepe, 7,000 years older than Stonehenge. Incredibly sophisticated site, very large scale. I mean, Klaus Schmidt, sadly he's passed away. I spent 3 days working the site with him. He was very generous to me. He showed me a lot. He talked to me a lot. And he said basically 50 times as much as they've already excavated is still under the ground, that there's hundreds and hundreds of giant stone pillars that they've identified with ground penetrating radar. He's not even sure if they're ever going to excavate them. But by all accounts, we are looking, if we take what's still under the ground into account, we're looking at the largest megalithic site that's ever been created on Earth. And it pops up 11,600 years ago with no obvious background to it. It just comes out of nowhere. Now, to me, that's rather well, that we know of. But to me, that's immediately a rather puzzling and an interesting situation. And I would be remiss as an author and an inquirer into these matters if I didn't take great interest in that. The sudden appearance 7,000 years before Stonehenge of a megalithic site that dwarfs Stonehenge, to me, that's a mystery, and it's really worth inquiring into.
To put it into perspective, that's more than 2,000 years older than what we now consider to be the building of the Great Pyramid of Giza in comparison to us to then. Mm-hmm. So between our time now in 2017 and the construction of the Great Pyramid, you're talking about 2,000 years earlier than that. I mean, that is unbelievable when you're talking about 7,000 years before what we thought people were doing.
Okay, but my point was that before we go down the road of constructing a lost civilization that was super advanced but different from our idea of advanced, why not just attribute to these fully modern hunter-gatherers who had the same size brains we have and so on, that they were able to figure out and do this? We just underestimated their abilities.
But why did archaeologists tell us for so long hunter-gatherers couldn't do it, and we needed agricultural populations that could generate surpluses, that could pay for the specialists
that was the theory. But that was so now what archaeologists are saying, well, I guess we were wrong about hunter-gatherers.
Well, they might be wrong about hunter-gatherers, or there might be another civilization that they had not discovered that has been unearthed by time.
Okay, but sorry, Michael, lost civilizations are not such an extraordinary idea. I mean, nobody knew that the Indus Valley civilization existed at all until some railway work was done around Mohenjo-Daro in 1923. Suddenly, a whole civilization pops up out of the woodwork that's just never been taken into account before the 1920s. We still can't read its script. You know, the idea that we come across that another turn of the spade reveals information that causes us to reconsider not just was it hunter-gatherers or agriculturalists, but perhaps something bigger than this is involved.
Or in between them.
That's not such an extraordinary idea. I get it that mainstream archaeology doesn't want to go there, but that's my job to go there.
I don't think that's correct. They would be happy to go there if there's evidence for it. By what you just said, they now fully accept the Indus Valley civilization. How did that happen if they were dogmatically closed-minded?
I don't say that they were dogmatically closed-minded about that. The evidence, the massive amount of evidence that came up with the discovery of Mohenjo-Daro, Harappa, Dolavira, and other such sites, it's very difficult. You have to be completely stupid to say that that's not a civilization. Göbekli Tepe is a bit more nuanced. You know, we have stone circles. We have some interesting astronomical alignments. The world's first perfectly north-south aligned building.
Maybe.
No, definitely.
Again, that's a patternicity thing.
Well, I'm citing Klaus Schmidt.
Well, that's all right. But any of us who read back into history 10,000 years ago, what we're thinking, that they might have been thinking, that's always dangerous for anybody, not just you, all of us.
That's a good point. Who's Klaus Schmidt?
Klaus Schmidt was the original excavator of Göbekli Tepe. He was the head of the German Archaeological Institute, DIG, at Göbekli Tepe. He kindly spent 3 days showing me around the site, and really nobody's disputing the astronomical alignments of Göbekli Tepe. They weren't particularly interesting to Klaus Schmidt, but they're there.
And what is the alignment? Like, how is it established?
Well, when you have a perfectly north-south aligned structure, perfectly north-south, to true north, not magnetic north, then you are dealing with astronomy by definition. And there are other alignments of the stone circles.
True north as established today, or with the precession of the equinoxes?
True north is always
about
true
12.
north.
Okay.
It's the rotation axis of the planet.
Okay, so to this day, it points exactly in the same place where it was pointing.
It always points to true north.
Okay.
But back to this, they don't want to go. Sure, they want to go there. They would be happy to go there. Case in point, 2 weeks ago in the journal Nature, the most prestigious scientific journal in the world, there was published an article that humans or maybe Neanderthals lived in San Diego area 130,000 years ago. This is an order of magnitude older than the Clovis date.
This was the mastodon bones they found that were smashed.
Bones, yeah. So here's an example of how, clearly there's not some conspiracy to keep alternative people or fringe or radical theories out. It was published in peer-reviewed, the most prestigious journal in the world. There it is.
And then what happened?
Well,
hasn't there been a massive reaction to that and lots of scathing remarks by other academics?
Yes, and that's normal. That's how
Yes.
science works.
Yeah.
You get pushed back. You got to have a thick skin. It's just the way it goes.
You've got to have a thick skin, that's for sure. But maybe sometimes your skin is so thick that you just can't sense anything around
Well,
you.
of course, we don't want that either.
So what do you think is going on when you look at something like Göbekli Tepe that's covered up purposefully, right?
Yes,
12,000 years
deliberately
ago?
buried. Again, I cite Klaus Schmidt. He's the authority on this. He's the
What is
excavator.
this?
He absolutely adamantly insists
so
that
dumb.
that site was deliberately buried and finally covered with a hill, which is what Göbekli Tepe means in the Turkish language, pot-bellied hill.
Yeah.
And you're talking about something. Give me the perspective of how large they believe it is currently, as of current.
What's excavated at the moment is on a scale of Stonehenge. What's under the ground may be as much as 50 times larger.
Jeez.
But at Göbekli Tepe, no one lived there. There's no tools. There's no.
Well, you're talking
they
about
don't even have-
12,000
But they don't even
years
have.
old, though.
But if it's buried, there should be pottery. There's no pottery, no writing, no articles of clothing. No one lived there.
Well, you're saying nobody lived there, so why should they have pottery? Why should pottery be in the fill? Why would
how about-
they go along and break some pots and stick it in the
But
artificial
how
fill?
about something? They're trash when something that would indicate it's different, a different kind of people than what we're used to seeing in the archaeological record.
Well,
in other words,
Well, it's just rubbish that they poured in. It's just stones and earth, buckets of it.
In other words, Graham, for you to gain support for your theory amongst mainstream archaeologists, they want to see positive evidence to overturn the old theory. In other words, the burden of proof is on the person challenging the mainstream.
I completely agree.
In every field.
But isn't there some proof that the mainstream idea of these hunters and gatherers never had anything in what the theory was that would indicate these people were capable of building something even remotely the size of Göbekli Tepe?
Yeah, to me, that's the stunning beauty of this find. It overturns our ideas of primitive hunter-gatherers that could not do this. Apparently, they can.
That's one
this is-
possible assessment.
That's right. So I call this, somebody else, the bigotry of low expectations. It's like we had this kind of low expectations for these hunter-gatherers. Maybe we should jettison that idea. And in my own other field of the history of religion, it also threw that off because this apparently was a kind of a spiritual, religious. That's the wrong word. They wouldn't have used.
Actually,
anything like
nobody can know that.
That's right. So, but if it was, this is the big National Geographic article emphasized that. Maybe this is the very first religious spiritual temple ever built because they didn't live there, so they went there for a reason.
Isn't it also possible that this is signs that civilization was more advanced 12,000 years ago than we thought?
Okay, more advanced. What do we mean by
We're
advanced?
talking about the ability to construct an amazing structure.
Well, okay.
How big was it? Like how tall were these stone?
Some of them are 20 feet tall.
Yeah, but
some of them are smaller with astronomical alignments. Klaus Schmidt called it a center of innovation. He was intrigued by the way that agriculture emerges around Göbekli Tepe at the same time that Göbekli Tepe is created. I mean, he went on record with me, perhaps he's not right, but he went on record with me as saying that was the first agriculture. These were the people who invented agriculture. Now, to me,
What is this?
the notion that a group of hunter-gatherers wake up one morning and invent megalithic architecture, the world's largest megalithic site, and at the same moment invent agriculture, stretches credulity a bit. And I think I would prefer to propose, and I have proposed, that what we're looking at is evidence of some kind of transfer of technology, that people came into that area who had other knowledge, and that was applied, and perhaps they mobilized the local population around this site. Perhaps that's precisely why we see agriculture developing there. So perhaps that's the skill that's being passed on.
But I don't see anything particularly. Okay, the stone work is spectacular, but that's not any more advanced
What?
a few millennium afterwards.
But
where
you're
they're-
talking
they're-
about something 20 feet
but
tall, made of stone,
but we know
by people that were
But a
hunter-gatherers.
couple hundred people can move multi-ton stones.
There's no mystery in moving the stones. They're
That's
still
right,
moving
right.
20-ton stones in Indonesia today.
Yeah,
I mean,
but
megalithic cultures still exist.
Right.
You also know that the carving on the outside is extremely complex. It's three-dimensional carving.
Okay, but I mean,
But you know that
okay,
means-
But
but do you know what that means?
But Lascaux at 30,000 years ago has magnificent cave paintings with
Right,
three-dimensional
but that's
animals.
But that's painting. You know
Well,
that they.
but there's
you
the-
know, hold on a second.
Yeah.
Do you know what I'm saying when I say three-dimensional carvings?
Yeah, like the Venus.
No,
Milo.
the carvings were on the outside, meaning they didn't carve them into the rock. They carved away the rock around them,
right.
which is pretty sophisticated stuff for hunter-gatherers. And they're doing this on these 20-foot tall stone columns. I mean, it's pretty impressive stuff.
Okay, but there the assumption is that they couldn't have figured this out. We know from modern societies where, say, Australian Aborigines, in one generation, they go from stone tools to flying airplanes. The brains are quite capable of doing these amazing things.
Did
It's
they
the
go
same
from,
brain.
did they
but
go
wait a
from
minute, they didn't
stone,
invent
stone
them.
tools
No,
to
no,
flying
but-
airplanes without somebody introducing them to airplanes?
Yeah, you're actually making his argument for him.
No. It's not that much of a reach to carve stone. People have been carving stones
But
for
the
thousands
entire
of years.
archaeological opinion on megalithic sites for decades before this was precisely that it was beyond their ability
Right,
to do.
and now the mainstream has changed its
Okay,
mind
but
about
let's-
this.
let's
or at
pa-
the very least,
A
they
little
said-
shift.
Let's
they
pause for
said-
a moment. Let's pause for a moment. So, for sure, we all agree human beings made this.
Like, why, man?
Aliens.
Okay.
Even
So
he
the
rejects the
argument,
aliens.
so the argument
I
is
do.
not whether or not aliens made it. The argument is whether or not humans made it that were sophisticated. Well, they're clearly sophisticated enough to make this incredible structure that is some sign of some sort of civilization. I mean,
I believe so. Yeah.
it is. It's a
And here
gigantic
Here
structure.
I agree with Graham that we've again undersold who these people were. My friend Jared Diamond goes to Papua New Guinea. He talks in the opening chapter, Guns, Germs, and Steel, how smart these people are that live out there in nature, and what it takes to survive.
Oh,
And
sure.
he wouldn't last an hour, from L.A. He wouldn't last an hour with his Papua New Guinean friends out there in the wild.
Well, that's
And
just
that-
because he doesn't know how to survive, and they've been
And they
passing
do,
down the
right.
information
That's right.
for
So
generation
they're
after
very,
generation.
very smart. Okay, so it's not
Sure.
it's not a problem of
Oh
intelligence.
my god,
And is
man.
there? Okay, so here's the other thing we don't know is that there might be lots more of these sites, and where there's
There are. I
yeah.
visited one of them, Karahan Tepe. You've got the T-shaped pillars sticking out the side of a hill in a farmer's backyard. I mean, I think we're actually at the beginning of opening up this inquiry, not at the end of it by
Okay,
any
so
means.
but then before you, okay, why not just say we don't
Like, what
know
a fucking
this is a
stupid piece
spectacular
of shit.
mystery and leave it at that? Why write a book that
Well,
says
you guys on
I'm
the
going to fill in all the gaps?
You guys on the mainstream side won't speculate and won't explore. I don't claim to be an archaeologist. I'm not a scientist. I'm an author. It's my job to offer an alternative point of view and to offer a coherently argued alternative
I hate
point of
this
view. And I must
fucking
say,
game,
Göbekli
man.
Tepe strikes me as a gigantic fucking mystery. And a mystery that is worthy of exploration from a point of view that may not satisfy you.
Oh well, you don't have to satisfy me.
You and
Uh,
your colleagues, and I certainly don't have to satisfy you or them. That's not my project.
But like your opening chapter with Schmidt, I thought I really loved the kind of conversational style you had with Schmidt in the book, where he's dialoguing, where Schmidt goes and look at this, and then he says,
What the fuck, man?
wait, what's that again? Now? He's like a little bit like Columbo. Like, wait, I have just one more question, and the mystery kind of thickens. That's perfectly okay. That's great. I mean, that's
Oh,
what
do I
science
need
is all
that
about, is
bat? I
uncovering
need that
mysteries
bat.
that we then have to figure out. So there's always more mystery.
I understand
But that
that.
doesn't mean that's not positive evidence in favor of a particular theory like the lost
I need
civilization.
that
It's
stupid
just,
bat.
You can't explain this. Full stop.
Yeah.
We certainly can't explain it, and you can't explain it by saying that we underestimated hunter and gatherers either.
Well, why not? We know they made it. Whatever you want to call them.
Well, we know humans made it.
That's right. We know humans made it. So whatever you want to call
why,
them.
But why do they believe that people were only hunters and gatherers 12,000 years ago? It's because they didn't have any evidence to the contrary.
Right.
This is evidence to the contrary.
I agree.
So you agree that there weren't hunter and gatherers?
Okay, but there's several stages in between. Just 12 people living out in the jungle by themselves
Sure.
versus us. There's like a whole bunch of different.
Well, I would say that Göbekli Tepe is a gigantic stage.
Well, we don't. Okay, they didn't live there, so we have to figure out where were they living and what was there. So that has to be excavated.
Well, they only excavated 10% of it, right?
And meanwhile, what you're saying is that we shouldn't speculate at all, because I mean, mainstream archaeology is speculating.
No,
Mainstream archaeology is
perfectly
speculating when saying it's definitely was hunter-gatherers who did this. That's also a
That
speculation.
seems more of a reach.
Okay, but not okay. They may be more than hunter-gatherers. They may have been partially settled. You can have any kind of number of states.
But what you can't apparently have is
We
the
can't be
possibility of a
serious.
transfer of technology from people who were really masters of that technology already when they came in.
But where are these people?
Well, you're dealing with an
where were their
incredible...
homes?
12,000
Where did
years
they live?
ago,
That's a
their
long
fingerprints are
time.
there. Let's find their homes. I don't know. I don't know that their homes matter. Would their homes even survive after 12,000
Well,
years?
homes.
I'm not
They're
sure.
trash.
But what
they're
survives?
Tools, they're something.
Well, what
Screw
would be...
trash and tools. We've got Göbekli Tepe. It confronts us. It challenges the mainstream model. I think it's reasonable to consider the possibility that there was something more than just hunter-gatherers involved here in creating this extraordinary place. And
Like
that's all I've
what?
done.
It seems to me
Like
that
what?
to say hunter-gatherers could build this, wouldn't be opposed to the idea that they're hunting and gathering, but it does certainly imply a lot of leisure time.
Yes.
A lot of leisure time.
Well,
And-
we know hunter-gatherers. I'm sorry.
It's okay. Let's look...
well, again, if we place this back, particularly within that climate zone at 11,006 to 12,000, 13,000 years ago, whatever it turns out to be, we're dealing with an extremely demanding and challenging climate, which wouldn't necessarily, to my mind, be conducive to the emergence of a settled culture that would be capable of undertaking a project on this scale. And as somebody who's built a lot of things and moved quite a few heavy weights in my time, I find it, the idea sort of perplexing to me that they would be, what I would have to ask is, what is their motive? What is their motive for undertaking a project on this scale? Because it's an enormous project. And to move a 20-ton block of stone is really a challenging task to undertake.
Today.
Well, without the infrastructure of large
what?
machines and so forth. But to do it by hand, it would be an enormous undertaking. And I, to me, it's like, when are they having time to hunt and gather when they're engaged in a project of this scale?
But we know hunter-gatherers have way more free time than modern society people do. That's the one thing we've learned, is that it's a pretty good way to make a living, actually. They have a better berry diet than we have. This is the Neanderthal diet, right? They have a better berry diet and a lot more free time.
Yeah, but that's
And
within
a lot less stress.
We knew that
So-
all along about hunter-gatherers when
Right.
we were saying they couldn't build megalithic sites.
But we're
So they have
looking
the
at
time.
a
They have the time
time
to do it.
where the environment is undergoing rapid changes, to which adaptations would be extremely challenging. And we know those changes are going on all over the planet. We know that sea levels are rapidly rising over a period of a few thousand years, from a sea stand low of about 400 feet up to the present level. We also know that biotas were shifting dramatically all over the planet. The effects of the Younger Dryas were global. Pretty much that is, I think, the emerging consensus now, that both hemispheres, north and south, were being affected by the climate changes of the Younger Dryas. So what we're doing is we're placing this phenomena, this project within this context of these extremely challenging times in which, adaptation to the environmental changes could easily be the all-consuming challenge of the times. I'm just finding it difficult to imagine a disconnect, to see this disconnect between a project of this magnitude and the motive for doing it during a time when obviously the environment could be posing serious constraints upon people's ability to function in that.
Well, Randall, we don't even know the motives of the Easter Islanders and
No, we
why
don't.
they raised these huge, but we know they did it.
But
And-
isn't
and-
that become a central question, though? Something had to have motivated it.
But let's get back to Göbekli Tepe. So let's just be real clear. We know there were humans. We know that it's at least 12,000 years old, and we know that the real dispute here, the real question is, did these people have structures and did they have?
Oh my gosh.
We know that they were human
Oh
beings.
my
They were
gosh.
essentially modern human beings. So were they hunter-gatherers, or did they have structures and
Before
agriculture?
Göbekli Tepe, they didn't have structures and they didn't have agriculture.
So we
After
know that,
Göbekli
yeah.
Tepe, they did.
So
What do you
the
hear?
fact that they
What
were
do you
able
hear?
to build something so
What happens here?
monumental what kind
What?
of leap is it at all to think that these people
What?
could figure out how to plant food and figure out
Is
how to
that a
make a
pipe?
house?
Is that a pipe there?
I mean, again, if you look back
I
30,000,
think it's a
40,000
pipe.
years to these cave paintings, these are pretty sophisticated.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
They are.
Clearly, they had abstract reasoning. They could think from the concrete to the abstract and so on. It's not a big reach to go from that to moving stones around.
I'd say there's a big difference between painting and engraving on
Yeah.
cave walls
I don't think so. I
and
mean,
creating
to me, the painting is even
sorry,
more
and creating the
sophisticated.
largest megalithic site that's ever been built on Earth.
Wait a minute.
I think there's a huge difference between those two. I mean, nobody would compare the construction effort on Stonehenge or Gigantea with cave paintings. I agree with you. The cave paintings are magnificent. I've had the privilege to visit many of the painted caves. Stunning work. And as Picasso said when he came out of Lascaux, we have invented nothing.
Right.
I mean, they were
Right.
that was that modern human mind, symbolic mind at
Right.
work there. But this is another matter. This is a large-scale construction project that's going on. And it's not just a construction project. It's not like huts. It's hundreds and hundreds of very, very large megalithic pillars, which have to be mobilized.
Yo,
brought to the place.
what's up? Yeah,
You know,
buddy, this is
organizing a workforce,
just Luigi. What's up,
in
bro?
order to do that, even that
up,
requires
Russ?
preparation and time and learning and practice. It's not something that you wake up one morning and
I think this is
do
just
well.
Luigi.
You think that the paintings are more impressive than Gobekli Tepe?
Yeah.
It's Kaizo.
Or at least comparable.
I think
because
that's
to-
I
but-
think
but
that's absolutely
because
ridiculous.
To convey
Oh, Luigi, number one.
2D plane, that's what Picasso meant. It's like, wow, that's incredible. It's like developing perspective and to use the natural shape
But
of
it's
the
just
walls
it's
to
not.
create a three-dimensional perspective look.
What the fuck,
That's
man?
pretty
You're
abstract.
comparing
No.
apples and pears. It's not a
Yeah.
construction project.
Okay,
It's,
so
it's not, I don't think
we
it's
don't
even
have to compare
remotely.
'em.
But I don't think it's even remotely
But
as
what I'm
impressive.
saying is
I'm
that
learning,
it
I'm
doesn't
learning.
take a huge leap of the imagination to think these people were pretty smart. They had
Well, we know
abstract
that they were
reasoning.
smart. We know what they were smart
No
just
dispute.
because of the fact that those construction projects were done by who? By whoever. We know that they were smart. Whoever built Gobekli Tepe was clearly intelligent. Whoever made those 3D carvings, clearly they were intelligent. But to think that someone drawing on cave paintings is more impressive
Not more
than
impressive,
erecting
just-
20-foot stone columns
it-
with three-dimensional carvings on them of a lot of animals that weren't even native to the region.
That's
yeah,
Is
that's
that
not
debatable?
necessarily the case.
Yeah.
Because they could have been
The
extinct
the animals were
fossil
native to
record.
But my point,
native to the
Joe,
region.
is that these paintings are like, say, 30, 40,000 years old to Gobekli Tepe. So there's tens of thousands of years to develop more that we're very likely to find more archaeological sites.
And yet,
between those.
up till now, we haven't found that. We haven't found all of that intermediate material, which is.
Oh, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it, I knew it was
material
pipe.
between the upper Paleolithic cave art and Gobekli Tepe. If I could see the gradual evolution and development of skills, I wouldn't need to invoke a lost civilization, the survivors of a lost civilization who've mastered those skills elsewhere to come in and teach those skills at Gobekli Tepe, but it still looks to me like a transfer of technology unless you can show me that evolutionary process whereby I can understand how this group of hunter-gatherers
Oh, no.
became equipped to create this giant site, where they practiced, where they learned the skills to move the stones, to organize the workforce, to feed and water the workforce in a rather dry place. All of that is actually quite a logistical challenge.
Yep, and obviously somebody met it somehow.
Some humans.
Yes,
right. So the
right,
real
right.
question is, did they have structures?
Oh, no.
Did they
What is
have
this?
agriculture?
What?
Did they have some sort of
Oh, I have a
community
cape
where
now.
They lived in an
Probably
established
something.
location.
Oh no.
I would imagine.
So would
This
that
is
would push
complex,
back
man.
The time where we
Have a
thought
cape.
that there was a civilization that would push them back into a realm of at least stepping out of the hunter-gatherer stage.
Now, your
correct?
guy Schmidt, as you show in your book, he did not go as far as you guys.
Certainly not.
Right.
no.
Oh, are you
But he
serious right
admitted
now?
It's a mystery. Okay, why?
Are you
that
serious
would be
right now?
The scientific approach.
This is real life.
I don't know what it is. Great mystery. Let's just wait and see. Versus, I'm going to postulate a lost civilization. Nothing wrong with
Oh.
that, Grant. It's a free country, and scientists do this all the time, as you've mentioned.
There's,
So
there's
just
a rather
follow.
humorous thing, which I have to say. Actually, I might even ask Jamie to pull up the couple of images of Fingerprints of the Gods. That's the book I'm best known for. And when I published Fingerprints of the Gods in 1995, essentially I was saying civilization is much older and much more mysterious than we thought. And I was ridiculed for proposing that. 2013, one of the magazines that ridiculed me, New Scientist magazine in Britain, publishes as a cover story a picture of Gobekli Tepe and headline. Civilization is much older and much more mysterious
All
than,
right, fair enough.
than we thought.
Fair enough. Okay, fair enough. And scientists do this. I mean, I've followed paleoanthropology for my whole
Come
life.
on, man.
And one of the big mysteries is how did we get a big brain? How did we get to abstract reasoning from say, what chimps can do? No one knows.
The doubling of the human brain size over a period of 2 million years,
and
right?
because no one knows, every couple of years there's a new book out. It's climate change. It was
The throwing arm, cooking
that's
food.
right. Cooking meat. You know, meat is another big one. A Harvard professor. Meat. Okay. And these books come and go, and some of them have legs, some of them don't, and it's just the way it goes.
And then there's Terence McKenna's
Pretty
theory.
obvious it was psychedelics.
Yeah, that's Terence McKenna's.
Oh
Not
my
that made the
God,
brain
come on,
bigger,
man.
but switched the brain
is this
on.
the old
Sucks.
Julian?
Julian Jaynes, no, the
no.
bicameral mind, not at all. This is David Lewis Williams, who's professor of anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand in South Africa. His neuropsychological theory of cave art, all kudos to Terence McKenna and Food of the Gods. What a brilliant
I hate this
thinker,
fucking
what a
stupid
brilliant
shit.
alternative thinker. But David Lewis Williams at the University of Witwatersrand had been working on this problem since 1973, and his argument is that the remarkable similarities that we see in rock and cave art all around the world are explained that we're dealing with a shamanistic art.
I hate this
Shamanism
fucking
involves
game.
altered states of consciousness. This is typical
What's up,
vision of altered states of consciousness.
What's up,
It
man?
seems to have accompanied
How are you,
the way
dude?
forward in human
Moo World, yeah,
You
buddy.
covered this in
Thanks,
your
man.
book,
I covered it in Supernatural.
Supernatural.
As did Richard Wrangham's theory. This is a highly regarded
This part's really pissing me off, though.
scientist at Harvard.
No,
That
like
he
what?
said meat,
You my input?
it's
What's up,
cooking
man?
meat,
How are you,
So
dude?
by cooking the protein, that's what gives you the energy to build a
Thanks for
huge
being here,
brain.
man.
All right, so now this guy is starting with 10 pluses on his side. He's Harvard, already respected. And even so, his book was like...
But come on, man.
maybe.
Well, it's probably a series of different events and a bunch of different
It could be.
factors.
That's right. Could be a number
Right.
of different things.
So let's get away from Göbekli Tepe and ancient civilizations, and let's
I
get
hate
back
this
to the
fucking game.
geological evidence, which Randall,
What's up,
you're an
dude?
expert at. And this is one of the main.
Yeah, I
things
think
you
you're
have to
right. I
dispute
should start
and
with this
is one of
game.
the reasons why we got everybody together. Now, what is your thoughts on what Randall and Graham proposed, specifically Randall, who is much more on the geological side of things?
Yeah.
What's up, big
Well,
ninja?
this is why I brought in my phone a friend,
Right.
a geologist. So, but by way of background, after your show, I thought, let's just give this a fair hearing. This is what we do. So this will be our cover story, and I think the end of summer issue comes out. We're only quarterly.
I hope that Mark Defant is going to be doing some more work on the draft of his article for you that is up online. Because that article is full of bullshit statements about me, which are demonstrably false.
Well, he's on.
Yeah,
here,
he's
so
there,
you
and I'm
can-
happy
you
to.
can
I'm happy
ask
to
him.
engage
What
with those
statements, Graham?
particular issues. Well, I'll have to put on my reading glasses.
And that whatever article's online, this has not been published yet.
Well,
so
it
this-
claims that it's a draft of the article that will appear in a 2017 edition of Skeptic magazine.
So pull it up, Graham, and
Sure.
Why
give
don't we
you a
bring
chance to
Mark
have your
on
time
and,
record.
Yeah.
Let's let Graham go over it first, and then we'll have Mark on
So
to
here's
refute what he said.
Defant on Magicians of the Gods. And by the way,
Oops.
Michael, I mean,
Did
you
it
said
say
that
what to
you're
do
here
there?
to,
Oops, was that the
you know,
secret?
to respectfully aim to get at the truth.
What does that
There
say?
it is, conjuring
let
up
me-
a lost civilization.
These
Yeah,
nuts?
let me just get to the top of this. I've got it here. Just bear with me a second.
Ooh, a
So,
secret.
amongst the
Oh, you
words in
didn't- you don't
Mark
know this? You
Defant's
didn't do this
article, he is accusing me of duping the public. He's saying that
I don't know. I don't know how
I'm
to. I don't know how to
enemy
advance.
number one.
I just
He's
know I have a
accusing me of
cape now.
Arm waving. I admit I do wave my arms.
Let me go back in this. Oh no, I
Pontificating
don't want to
how
go
my
back in the.
grandfather
Oh
was
wait,
a minister of the church.
do I want to go back in
They were
flying?
interested
Maybe
in
that
peer-reviewed
works.
research.
Let's try that.
No academic
Oh, I didn't know
debate.
that.
That's utter bullshit. I had a debate
pipe.
with
Yeah.
Zahi Hawass. He's a
I know.
leading Egyptian
But,
Egyptologist.
I
Back
wanna
in
see if it,
2015, it was not my fault that Zahi Hawass walked out on that debate. I can play
Thanks,
a
man.
video if you like, a minute and a half of Zahi Hawass lambasting me and then walking out and refusing to debate further. So it's bullshit to say I don't debate or I'm not willing to debate. And finally, he says that I'm
No, again?
fallacious
Are you
number of
serious,
people
like,
into buying
right
his
now?
books. How
Are
can
you
we get any
serious right
dialogue
now?
going when
I
somebody
hate this
begins
stupid
like
fucking
that?
game.
Okay.
Then would you like some further? Bear with me because I just
Like,
have
I
to
hate this
scroll
shit.
down and I don't have a mouse.
I don't want to do this anymore.
I don't have a mouse, so...
You don't need
Hancock
the...
and
Oh,
Carlson
really?
claimed
Just
it
jump
several
on wing
times
block
that
and jump
no
up...
academic
Oh,
data
really?
not
Are
true.
you serious? I had no
I'm
idea.
accused of doing
Thanks,
an
bro.
about-face, since,
That actually helps a lot.
since Fingerprints of the Gods.
Oh, I
Are
hate
my-
this.
I
Like,
mean,
I
are my
hate this
views
stupid
not
fucking
allowed
thing.
to evolve with new evidence?
So
Is
let's
that
go
somehow
fast, yeah.
a crime on my
Thanks,
part? Let me
man.
just finish.
Yeah.
Then a cheap shot, you know, he cites Jesus Gamara. And accuses me of not having the scientific knowledge to deal with issues of gravitation. Now, it's true that Jesus Gamara, who is a descendant
Jump,
of
you
the
piece of
Incas,
shit.
who has worked 70 years on the megaliths of Sacsayhuaman, whose father before him, Alfredo Gamara, worked 70 years. It's true that he's got a way-out theory about gravitation. Thing is, I state in my book that it's a way-out theory.
Yo,
What I
thanks
go
for
on to
being here,
say,
man. I'm
quoting
glad
the
you're here.
attack, is that, however, this isn't the part of his theory I'm interested in. Where I feel he is solidly persuasive is in his observations of the anomalous character of the
God,
monuments of
I
the
saw.
Andes, etc., etc. Defant doesn't cite that.
God,
he just
no.
presents me as buying what Jesus Gamara says. I mean, if that's the standard that you're going to have in Skeptic magazine, you have a serious problem. And then Göbekli Tepe, he
hate this
contends
fucking
that
game.
Göbekli Tepe is
I
too
hate this game.
advanced to have been completed by hunter-gatherers and must have been
So when the
constructed
wing
by a more
floats
advanced
left,
civilization. Well,
you can
no,
probably
that's not what I say.
respawn
I
it.
say it was constructed by hunter-gatherers, but that they were advised and supported by people who had knowledge of this kind of work beforehand.
How is that
Getting,
different?
getting a working is
fly.
very different. I'm not saying it was constructed by. I'm saying that a group of people settled amongst hunter-gatherers and transferred.
Maybe
some
this is
skills
too advanced for me.
he says that, he quotes me, Hancock makes the following stunning claim. Quote,
Oh, I hate
our
this stupid
ancestors are
fucking
being initiated into the secrets of metals
So
and
I can
how to
stick
make
to the
swords
ceiling
and
and
knives. I do
sing.
not make that claim. I'm reporting
Oh,
that
I
this claim
understand,
is
yeah.
made in the Book of Enoch. That is not my claim. Then what else?
Wow, that was
So you
lucky.
don't think that's the explanation?
Well, I'm being misrepresented by your author here.
But I
He's-
mean, all right, but-
if he wants
But
to
do you
represent me, if he
know?
accuses me of cherry picking, he shouldn't cherry pick
Okay,
my
we're-
statements.
we're,
He should
we're
quote it
still
in full
working on
context.
this. Let's get it right.
Well, it's
so
out
you
there.
don't, you don't
It's
accept
out
it.
there
Too
online.
dumb, man.
No, well,
You're still working
oh,
on it,
and
but
then-
it's
and then
published
here's a-
online.
no,
Here's a beautiful
didn't-
one.
I
Here's a-
didn't know it was online.
Here's a beautiful one. He cites Klaus Schmidt
Mm.
on the character. Schmidt makes a salient point, almost as if he anticipated
Thanks,
Hancock's
man.
book. Quote, fabulous or mythical creatures such as centaurs or the sphinx, winged bulls, or horses do not yet occur in the iconography, and therefore in the mythology
You gotta
of
release up
prehistoric times
to
they
get
must be
off the
recognized as
vine.
creations of the high cultures which arose later. Well, bullshit.
I gotta
bullshit.
release
You've
up.
just been talking
Right.
about the painted caves. Go to Chauvet Cave. You will see a lion man, Hohensteinstadt, a lion man carved out of mammoth.
No!
Go to Chauvet.
No!
Straddling lion woman. Her right arm is transferring.
Gotta release
is
up. Alright.
transforming into
Thanks,
into the
man.
head of a lion. So certainly these mythical creatures did exist in the Upper Paleolithic, and it's rubbish to say
I
that
hate
they
this
didn't.
fucking
I mean, how can I go on? The teapot. Oh yeah. Okay. So he's taking issue with me because I
Thanks
suggest
for being
that
here,
the
bro.
vulture on pillar 43 in enclosure D is representing the teapot asterism of the constellation of Sagittarius, and he goes and gives us little things of Uncle Sam and some other thing that he shows. Anybody can impose any image on anything. Well, it's not my fault that a couple of academics who didn't even talk to me and had nothing.
Thanks, man.
whatsoever
Thank
to
you
do
for
with
helping me
published a major
suggest
study
this level
in
and
I quote it
all these
again,
tips.
The Mediterranean Archaeology and Archaeometry, a peer-reviewed journal, where
I mean,
they make
come on,
precisely that
man.
identification. So at least I'm not alone.
I was fine shit,
At
but
least
this is
there are
frustrating.
peer-reviewed
Yeah,
influential
man. Like,
scholars who also agree
this is.
that
I'm
that
I'm
figure
really
is
enraged.
representing the teapot asterism within the constellation of Sagittarius. No reference to that.
I don't do this anymore.
Schock's opinions were supposed to not go into the minutiae because they've already
I
been
hate this
dismissed
fucking
by a
stupid
study
shit.
by Liritzis and Vafiadou. Far from it. That study doesn't dismiss Schock at all. None of that study was done on the body of the Sphinx itself.
Okay,
It
I
was
need
done
that.
in the
I need
Valley
that
and the Sphinx
friggin'
temples.
bat. Don't
And
pass
by
away
the
the
way,
bat.
The dates are extremely troubling.
I know
Some
I
of
was
them
holding
push it as
up.
far
I
as
know.
3600 BC that the work was done, or as early in some cases as 1000 BC. I don't think that's
I am aware.
anything.
I'm aware of that fact.
And so on.
No.
Just to clarify
Like,
what
why?
you do believe, then, so that we
dumb.
don't misrepresent you. So you don't think that.
Oh, you could probably
civilization
use the
instructed them on
cape
use
to
of
go
metals.
down.
I don't
and
know.
maybe find
I
some
don't
stuff
see
down
evidence for
there.
that at
But
Göbekli
why
Tepe.
would you put
But I just
that
want to
in
be.
the
I just want to
book
be the
then?
level,
I didn't put
man.
it in the book. I was quoting the Book of Enoch. It's a huge passage on the Book of Enoch. It's me, not me who's saying that. It's the Book of Enoch that's
Okay,
saying
I
that.
understand, but why? I forget
All I
what,
require,
I forget what the
This
all I
sucks so
require
fucking
your
much, guys.
defense to do is to state that Hancock is citing the Book of Eden. He didn't do that.
There's no way.
That is, what's the
fair enough,
word?
that's fine, fair enough,
Disingenuous? Is
There's
that
no
the right
way.
word you guys
Is there? I don't think there's a way.
It seems more than
I can
disingenuous.
respawn it?
It's
No
a
freaking
character
way.
Well,
assassination.
but the question is what's the context
Really?
of including it?
Ninja, you're a genius,
Well,
bro.
the context is that actually I was criticizing Zachariah Sitchin. That's primarily what I was
So
doing.
you don't think that a lost civilization instructed the people who built Göbekli
Oh, I get these guys.
tools?
I see no evidence for that. I see
Oh,
Göbekli
we
Tepe.
did it.
I can't
We
go say they instructed
Oh,
them
I'm
on
gonna
use of
pass
metals and
away.
tools unless I can find
I'm
evidence.
gonna pass
So
away,
what
aren't I?
did they do?
We don't know.
They generated agriculture. They created a center of excellence around which a
No, not
hunter-gatherer.
they.
Oh, thank
built
God.
Göbekli Tepe, the lost civilization that
The
advised
cheese.
that these things happened.
Yeah.
What did they do?
Thanks,
if they-
man. Thanks, man.
They've come through a cataclysm.
I'm
Their
so glad I'm out of that
survivors,
level.
few in
Oh my
number. This is
God,
my
dude.
Scenario. You don't have to accept it. I'm sure you don't. They settle take refuge amongst hunter-gatherers.
Oh my
I
gosh.
don't know. You're probably have some survival skills. I
Where am
don't
I?
have many. I mean, if,
Oh, no.
If we were to have a comet impact in the world today, which were to take out all the underpinnings of modern civilization,
Oh no.
I
Why?
might go settle
Oh,
with
I
hunter-gatherers
understand.
because they're the people who know best how to
That's
live
where I would
in
go.
that
I have no
situation.
survival skills.
Yeah, so go
That's where I
settle
would-
amongst hunter-gatherers.
Secret
but I might
already,
be
I
able to
guess so.
transfer some of my knowledge to them. I might have something that
What?
I could transfer to them, and I
What?
might have very strong reasons why I might not choose to transfer all of it.
But so, in other words, perhaps this is what happened. Okay, maybe. But how is that different from
Come on, man.
Zachariah Sitchin's? Well, the aliens.
I understand now.
Well,
I understand.
Well,
I
that's
don't
a lot
need.
different.
I think it's massively different, especially since Zachariah Sitchin has his aliens arriving
Oh my
here
God,
in
man.
1970s NASA technology. Weirdly, he wrote his book in the 1970s. I mean, I don't.
Oh, what?
I don't go there.
Oh,
I don't
come
make
on.
that. I don't
Yeah,
make that
but why-
suggestion. I'm
why
simply
not?
saying, perhaps there's been a forgotten episode in human history. Perhaps its fingerprints are present at a number of sites around the world, but perhaps the extremely defensive, arrogant, and patronizing attitude of mainstream
Like, fuck
academia
this.
is stopping us from considering that possibility, and therefore I campaign to get that possibility considered, and I try to do so with as loud a voice as possible.
Well, you're doing it. You're doing it, man.
But doesn't it
But-
disturb you that you run Skeptic magazine and someone publishes something like
Oh my
that?
God.
I mean, that goes against the whole idea of critical thinking. I mean, it's misrepresenting his quotes.
Well-
it's misrepresenting his perspective, his point of view. It's really disingenuous.
This is one reason we're doing this, so we could get his.
But why would anybody write something like that? And why would you?
Ah,
just
go
publish something
fast,
Like
I
that without checking
understand,
the
man.
facts?
We are.
I want to go
This is not supposed to be
fast.
posted.
Oh no.
And why is
This
such
is
a
one of the
person?
reasons
Why
It's online though. How does something get online if it's not
why is such a
supposed to?
person who will do that a useful
Oh God.
contributor to your
You got to
side
do
of the
this
debate?
the circle jump.
One of the reasons we're here is to get your point of view exactly right. All right. So you're saying that there's no evidence that any lost civilization exists. Only the
No, I'm not saying that. I'm
Only
saying
the fingerprints of their influence on later peoples we do know existed.
I'm saying there are physical objects. I say Göbekli Tepe is one of them. I say the Sphinx is another.
But see, this is that argument from either ignorance or personal incredulity. I don't accept the mainstream, or I can't think of how
Oh my
these
gosh.
pyramids could have been built, therefore it was built by
Oh my
somebody
gosh.
else through some other technology.
That's not what
Well,
he's saying.
that's
They're
not what I'm
just
saying.
post-dating.
Is that a
it.
hard
They're just-
bone?
if
All I'm
you
saying
know
is the
the
Sphinx
Robert
is
Schock
the Sphinx is
argument.
Oh
older.
what?
I do
It's
go
just
with
so
Robert Schock's
slippery.
argument on the geology. I'm also very interested in the astronomy of the site.
I'm
Again, I
awful
have
at
slides
Mario
that I can
World.
Show on this if we have
I can
time,
spin on his
you might want to look
eyes.
into Ed Krupp's criticism of the Orion.
Is that
correlation.
bone hard
He
though?
says
Why
it's
is this so
upside down.
slippery?
We can
Look
talk
how
to you about
slippery this is.
We do. I mean, I know it. Krupp's
Like,
argument
why?
about that, and that was from the 90s, I think.
What's your
Yeah,
thoughts on Robert Schock's conclusions?
I don't. That's not something I know much about.
Well, you
Well,
should.
that's a
if you're
huge
there.
factor. It's a huge factor because it's
Your
all
Mark,
about
your
water
Mark
erosion.
Defant knows about Schock,
Well,
and he rejects him
what
on the
am I?
basis of that paper.
Yeah.
And that paper really doesn't date the Sphinx. It works with dating of large blocks in the valley and the Sphinx.
That is a
Not
hard
a single
bone.
sample taken from us.
All right. Then who dated it?
Who dated it? Laritzis of
And
Baffiano.
then why?
Thanks, man.
Why do mainstream archaeologists not accept
That's
the
super
older date for
fucking
the
low.
Sphinx? And the answer is because they have a whole bunch of other evidence that points to the date that they think
The
it
answer
does.
is to your question is
I
very
hate
simple.
this- I hate
Mark
this
Lehner
shit.
and Zahi Hawass put it on record back in 1992 when John Anthony West and
Fuck
Robert
you.
Schock first presented
Not you, Ninja.
the
Again.
rainfall erosion evidence on the Sphinx.
Sorry, man.
And what Lehner and Hawass said is, The Sphinx can't possibly
hate
be
this shit.
12,000 plus years old because there was no other culture anywhere in the world that was capable of creating large-scale monumental architecture like this. Show me one other structure that's capable of doing that. Well, they could say that in 1992, Michael, but they can't say it in 2017.
Oh, who's just been jump?
Not since
Oh my god, I
Göbekli
hate this
Tepe's
If
been
you
game.
don't mind,
excavated.
Graham, could you please, for people, so this could be a standalone thing, people could understand, what is the argument about the
Oh my
Sphinx
gosh,
and
Ninja,
Sphinx?
you're a genius,
Dr.
bro.
Robert Schock from Boston University, who's
genius.
a geologist. What was his conclusion?
Oh come
What
on,
Schock is
man.
saying is that the Sphinx and
So
the
fucking
trench out of which the Sphinx is cut
Oh my god.
bears the
Oh my
unmistakable
goodness.
evidence of precipitation-induced weathering caused by exposure to a
see that
substantial
speed?
period of heavy rainfall. And that is particularly pointed out in the vertical fissures in the trench. So you see, the Sphinx itself has been
I'm
subject to
learning,
so
man.
much
I'm
restoration over
learning,
so many
dude.
years that it's difficult for people to even see the core body of the
Thanks,
Sphinx.
man. Thanks, bro.
But it's
I was
easy,
really
you can see
upset
the
there.
vertical fissures even down at the back of there. That is what Schock counts as rainfall.
Oh, what?
precipitation
What's
induced
this?
weathering. Heavy rainfall,
What's
which is
this?
selectively removing the softer layers and leaving the harder layers in place. And the problem is we don't have that rainfall in Giza, in Egypt, 4,500 years ago. You have to go back much earlier to get that rainfall. That's the suggestion.
So that's the suggestion by Robert Schock,
Yeah.
independently of,
Yes.
of your conclusions. or
Totally
anything else.
independently. Schock disagrees with me on many things,
Yeah.
as a matter of fact. And I disagree with him on many things, but I think he's on the money on this.
So that alone would set back at least that one. I mean, it's pretty much established that the Great Pyramid of Giza was constructed about 2,500 BC, right?
There's absolutely no doubt that a huge project went on at Giza around 2,500.
So your argument
involves-
is
Oops.
not that the whole thing was that much older, was that parts of it seem to have been from an earlier civilization, or at least that
Oh, so-
civilization far, far earlier than was.
I would say that the ground plan, what we have at Giza,
Oh
the
God,
basic
man.
layout of the site, was established.
You don't remember any of this
in
game? That's cool, man.
It's called Zep Tepi, the first time. Astronomically and geologically, I and my colleagues suggest that the first time can be dated to the period of about 12,500 to
God,
13,000 years ago. That
Are there dead
that was
frames
when
in
the
this?
site was laid out, 'cause there's intriguing
Where you
astronomical
can't jump on the
alignments of
frame?
The Great Pyramids to the Belt of Orion. I know Ed Krupp has a completely opposite view on this. And of the Great Sphinx to the constellation of Leo,
Looks like it.
rising due east, housing the sun on the equinox, the astrological age of Leo. Again, I have slides I can
And that would
show.
align with the geological evidence that Robert
Yes.
Schock
It
concludes.
aligns with the geological evidence. The
Thousands of years of
age of
rainfall.
Leo pretty much exactly.
Can you
spans
jump on the frame you land?
And so the only argument against that at the time was that there were no other structures like that from 12,000 years
Correct.
ago.
And
Now
then,
there are.
and then Krupp said that the Orion correlation wasn't real because it was upside down. I mean,
But
do you
the
want to get
argument-
into that now?
Well, first,
Because Mega Man,
that's not the only argument.
Mega Man
That
3,
the-
you
the
can't.
Sphinx is built, or
You
the
can't jump on the
layout
frame you
was
land.
Built in, say 10, 11,000 years ago, and then the pyramids are built, 2,500 BC.
Oh,
What
no.
happened in
Oh, no.
between? Where are all the people, the trash, the places where they lived
Well, there's
in
a
that
bunch of
area?
different styles of construction.
Something like a,
But not
I-
dated in between.
I would propose, Michael, something like a monastery, which has a relatively small archaeological footprint, is on the site. I mean, the idea of information, knowledge, and traditions lasting for thousands
Hey.
of years within a religious system shouldn't be too absurd to us. I mean, Judaism
We did something.
is dealing with ideas that are already best part of 4,000 years old if we go back to Ur
Thanks, man.
Charles
Thanks,
and
buddy.
so on and so forth. So
Man,
that's
oh,
all I'm
thanks.
suggesting, really, that the idea is
No
preserve,
way.
maintain
Thanks, dude.
the-
What?
the surviving
where?
of the
Serious?
on the site, but in
You're
the
something like a
Kaizo
monastery,
master, man.
which has got a very small archaeological footprint. It is not high. Perhaps again, one can only speculate.
How about this
And I
music?
think there's a lot of speculation on the archaeological.
Oh, I got a
side,
double
too.
shell
One can
jump?
only speculate. Perhaps having gone through
Oh
a
my
cataclysm,
god.
perhaps they felt to blame for this. Wrongly
Oh
or
no,
rightly.
now I'm in for
There are
double.
many
Yeah.
conditions in which humanity's behavior is implicated
Oh.
in the cataclysm that takes place, and perhaps they
Oh,
didn't
no.
want to switch
Oh, no.
civilization
It's gone.
on completely right there. Perhaps
Is it
they,
gone forever?
Perhaps they waited, passed down the knowledge through
Oh.
initiates. Enough was there to create a mystery, because it's undoubtedly a mystery that the construction of the Great Pyramids, the first huge pyramids in Egypt, preceded only really by the Zoser pyramid at Saqqara, that the construction of the Great Pyramids is vastly
Oh, I get to retry?
superior to the construction
Uh-oh.
of the pyramids of the 5th
What if
and
I can't
6th
get it?
dynasty that follow it. And that's a little bit
I'm stuck here forever?
counterintuitive, that we have this collapse in skills. One would have expected it to got better. So it sounds
Oh, I
like
understand.
the work on the pyramids started already
Oh.
with a level of knowledge in it.
Yes, but okay, so here's
Oh.
how I would think about that.
Where'd it
there were
go?
perhapsing and maybes because
Always.
yeah,
Face
so
left.
you have
It's
a
gone.
bunch of Egyptologists and archaeologists who have been working on this site
Oh, I
for
can exit.
centuries. This is one of the most ancient mysteries and so on. And so let's say there's
And
like
not
20
move
lines
the
of evidence
joystick.
that point to built
Interesting.
roughly around this time period here.
Interesting.
And then you come on and say,
Thanks,
okay,
dude.
but there's this one anomaly of the
Oh,
rain
no.
thing that, and
Oh,
then
no.
there was only rain at this time. Now there's a huge gap. You have one anomaly or line of evidence here and like 20 here.
Well, we're talking about
So-
different structures, though. There's not a lot of evidence that points to the Sphinx being from a particular time period.
Well, he's saying like 12,000, right?
I'm saying the rainfall evidence suggests
Oh,
that.
okay,
And its
okay.
alignment, and its alignment with the constellation of Leo
Okay.
housing the sun
Right,
at
right.
dawn on the spring equinox. It's an equinoctial marker. Nobody would dispute that. Nobody would dispute that the ancient Egypt. Well, no. I mean, if you make a monument pointing perfectly due east, I've stood on the back of the
Oh,
Sphinx
okay,
at dawn
okay,
on the
okay,
spring
okay.
equinox, and believe me, again, I could show a picture. Its head lines up perfectly with the rising sun. But no, I don't think anybody, even Krupp, is disputing that it's an equinoctial marker. Now, here's the thing.
Top tier
You're
music.
an ancient Egyptian. You're building an equinoctial marker in 2500 BC. Do you know what constellation is housing the sun in 2500 BC?
I haven't run the little program.
Well,
to
it's the
see.
constellation of Taurus.
So-
So logically, if you're creating
I
an
think this is looking
equinoctial marker,
promising. No
ancient
way,
Egyptians were
dude.
not
There's
shy
no way.
about making
Maybe.
images of bulls. Plenty of them. If you're making an equinoctial marker in 2500
Oh.
BC, you really should create it in the
Oh.
form of a bull, not in the form of a lion. You know, that's the puzzling issue, and yet we do have a time when a lion constellation housed the sun
At the height of my
at dawn
jump.
on the spring equinox, and that is the period of the universe.
Thanks, man.
Okay, I'd say that's a pretty big leap. isn't
Well,
it?
I know you.
Ah,
Your
okay,
colleagues
yeah,
will
yeah.
say that too.
Oh.
So now, and then we have a gap of about 5,000 or 6,000 years where there's nothing. There's
Well,
no.
let me
there's-
interject there.
yeah,
Can I
so-
interject?
Yeah,
This is
please.
fun, man.
I'm
Thanks,
going to
dude.
refer back to several articles that were
Thanks for
published
suggestion
in
of this
the
hack,
80s. This
too.
one is from Nature, early 80s, late Quaternary history of the Nile. And what it's discussing is the evidence that there was a major shift in the hydraulic regime of the Nile River. It says between 20,000 and 12,000 years before present, when timberline in the headwaters was lower, vegetation cover more open than today, the Nile was a highly seasonal braided river, which brought mixed coarse and fine sediments down to Egypt and Sudan. This cold, dry interval had ended by 12,500 years before present, when overflow from Lake Victoria
I don't know, man.
and
I might quit this.
rainfall in Ethiopia sent extraordinary floods down
This is just for
main
the blue
Nile.
coin, I
And
guess.
those floods have been documented
Oh,
to
it was
be
almost it.
120 feet above the modern floodplain of the Nile.
Oh,
Any civilization, or whatever you want
Oh.
to call it, living along the Nile River at that time would have had to abandon whatever they were doing there in this regime, this intensified hydraulic regime. And it goes on to say it marked a revolutionary change to continuous flow with a superimposed flood peak. So what happened is that there was a major environmental change that occurred right there around 12,000 to 12,500 years. The dating could be adjusted somewhat since the early 80s, but the point
try
is
one more
made
time,
is
name
that
an accent.
because of a major hydrological
I'm gonna
change,
accent.
major vegetational cover change, major environmental change, this would have caused also
usually responding to
imposed
destroyed.
changes upon whatever culture
We'll come back
was
to that.
existing there or living there at the time. Now what we have is
I need to speedrun this again. Oh my goodness.
we have basically the
Oh my
emergence of
goodness.
death, which now
Oh
would
my
require
goodness.
serious adaptation. It's very likely too that these events
Wow.
could have also decimated the population at the time, leaving basically no workforce. And then over a period of 2,000 or 3,000 or 4,000 years, you find that there's enough of a recovery that these kind of monumental structures
Oh my
can
god.
be renewed. But it's clear from this and a lot
Thanks,
of
bro.
other
Thanks for being here, man.
studies in the Eastern Mediterranean showing that there are
Oh, come
sapropellators,
on.
which is basically material that has been washed in from the continental surface that has not oxidized. It has essentially become rotten and carried in organic material, carried
Oh,
in
why-
onto the
why?
continents by this
That's so
enhanced
dumb.
regime of water flow, actually forcing so much water that there was a freshwater lid on the Eastern Mediterranean that caused a cessation in the circulation between the upper waters and the lower waters, reducing the
music.
amount of oxygen brought down to the lower waters, and so you had these
Like,
layers of
why?
mud that
That's so
formed on
dumb.
the bottom of the Mediterranean.
It's not real.
That show this massive influx
Wow.
of fresh water flowing out of the Nile and off of the Egyptian continent at this same time. So clearly the evidence shows that there were major climatic changes that occurred around this time. It is not so speculative to imagine
Skull Rise can be glitchy.
whatever,
Yeah,
we
tell
don't
me
have to
about it.
invoke any kind of a super advanced civilization, but whatever cultures were there that were perhaps capable of carving blocks of stone,
Oh my
transporting
God, I
blocks
hate
of
this
stone as they
fucking
were at Göbekli Tepe during this time range, would have been that their activity would have been interrupted to the extent that it might have taken millennia to recover, to get the
my
labor force
God.
necessary to undertake major monumental programs on the Giza Plateau. So I think that if we assume this gradualistic scenario, yeah, that's a fair question to ask. What happened in that interval? But if there is a major climatic downturn and a major disruption of the settled patterns of whatever culture was already there, then
Oh my
now
God.
we might have an explanation why there would be,
Like, what?
especially if these events caused a bottleneck in the population of the area. Of course, this is all speculative, but it is not speculative to say that there is multiple lines of evidence suggesting these major, even cataclysmic changes.
It is a beautiful
that
game, though.
engulfed
It looks
that part of
amazing.
the world during that era. So that could provide an explanation of why there is a gap there.
Makes a ton of sense.
Well, it doesn't, because
Does it not?
only if you have to have the Sphinx in conjunction with 12,000 years ago in the lost civilization. If you just say that rainwater
I hate this
erosion
stupid fucking
on
thing.
the Sphinx is not an explanation for the age, and that the traditional accepted age
Like, come
is
on, man.
what we think it is, then there's no gap to fill. So really, all we're talking about is we have, again, lots of evidence here, one anomaly here. I really want the anomaly thing to stick, so I got to explain the gap. The gap is explained by environmental changes.
Yeah,
Okay,
but what is
maybe,
the
but-
lots of evidence other than a lot of assumptions
It's
and a
all
lot
assumptions.
of maybes?
It's all. I mean, actually, can you cite me a single contemporary inscription from the date that
I
the
wanna-
Sphinx is supposed to have been made that refers to the Sphinx?
Don't want to do this.
I'm sorry. Say
Can
that
you cite a single contemporary inscription
contemporary
from ancient, contemporary to the date that Egyptologists ascribe to the Sphinx? In other words, to the reign of Khufu. Can you cite me a single inscription that talks about the Sphinx being built?
This is
Cut the
not.
card.
I don't study this area. I don't know.
Okay, well, you can't, because there is no
Like,
such
what?
inscription.
Okay. Well,
I hate this
Well, one
fucking
would have
stupid
thought there
shit.
would be.
Well, maybe.
It's a giant project. It's 270 feet long. It's 70 feet high. It's carved out of solid rock. Nothing.
but you have
No
all
reference to
these
it at
other-
all in the Old Kingdom. You actually have to come down to the New Kingdom to get
Now I
references
know
to the
how.
Sphinx and
Now I know
inscriptions.
why you get so
you've already
mad,
said
dude.
that,
You get so
pyramids were built
mad.
at the time. We think
Now I
they were
understand.
not thousands of
I
I
years
would say
understand the
that a
rage.
great deal of work was done on the pyramids at the time of 2500 BC. I think the ground plan was laid out
And
here.
we have like a step pyramid, which is cruder and not as well designed as the other pyramids. That's a
You
transition
got it.
stage
Thanks, bro.
at that time.
Often argued to be a transitional stage. Have you been to the step pyramid? I'm sure.
No,
So bad.
Right, and you've been to Giza.
no, I've never been to Giza.
Oh dear. Well, they do make a very different impact.
The music's
I've climbed
nice.
the Great
I like the
Pyramid
music.
5 times,
Well,
I mean, you're dealing with something orders of magnitude different in terms of what's required. I mean, this thing weighs 6 million
Oh, I
tons.
understand, but
It's 481 feet high. It consists of 2.5
I swear
million
you can't. I
individual
don't know if you can
blocks.
jump
So
on the
it's a
frame you
line true
land.
north within 3/60ths of a single degree. I mean, to compare that to Zoser is really not a
Might be
valid
wrong.
comparison at all. What's more interesting to me is the radical decline that takes place in pyramid building skills in the 5th and 6th dynasty. Go to Unas, go to Pepi, go to Teti and
Maybe.
Saqqara.
Looks like the
These
frame-
are
looks like I'm jumping on
shambles.
the
You can
frame,
hardly
like, I
even
don't know.
recognize them as a pyramid. What happened to all that knowledge that's invested in the Great Pyramid? Why does Egypt devolve so rapidly? How do we explain this pristine, amazing work that's done on the Great Pyramid unless there's a legacy of knowledge being attached?
But there's moments like
so
that where it makes
every
you wonder.
archaeologist, Egyptian archaeologist and Egyptiologist knows everything you
What?
just said.
They do.
And they don't accept any of your arguments. Why not?
That's why I'm needed, because somebody's got to
Well, I
counter
mean,
this.
is it just that they're
Like,
closed-minded? open-minded and they follow Zahia Voss and they never think for themselves.
You want to see a closed mind? I'll play you a 1.5-minute video of Zahia Voss refusing to debate with me.
But all of them
Can't be much more after that part, thanks, bro.
Egyptologists and archaeologists over the last 2 centuries and so on, they're all dogmatically closed-minded and they can't see the arguments as clear as you. Or is it they're not convinced by your argument?
They're not convinced by my argument. They genuinely and absolutely believe that their argument is right. The notion that I'm proposing is apparently so preposterous to them
hate
that
this
it isn't
fucking
even
game.
worthy of consideration, but it is worthy of
pardon me.
insults and attacks on me, on my integrity, on my decency as a human being, on my honesty. All of those things get attacked, you know, because mainstream, and that's fine, I'm ready for that. And by the way, I know that archaeologists, academics constantly attack each other all the time. I used to take this stuff personally, but then when I see what they do to each other, the ravaging attack dogs are let loose on any new idea. I sometimes wish scientists would actually look for what's good in a new idea rather than what's bad. But I get why they do look for what's bad.
But in other words, some young graduate student working in that area
Going
could
fishing.
make a name for himself by
Nice.
overturning.
Oh no,
My
water.
son was a young graduate student at the University of Cardiff studying Egyptology. He got marked down in his degree because he proposed the
Oh, no.
possibility that the pyramids and the Sphinx might be or might have older origins. He was impressed by my work. It did him a lot of harm in his degree.
And if all this was true,
Oh, no.
then eventually
You haven't
it
answered my
would
point.
come
You haven't
out.
answered my point.
Which is
if
what?
you go against the mainstream view, your career does not progress as an Egyptologist.
I disagree. I mean,
Give me an example.
How is it that we know anything
Wow.
that we know about Egyptology
Give me an example
now?
from Egyptology. of somebody who's gone against the
Thanks,
mainstream view
man.
and been lauded for so doing.
Well,
I didn't beat
we don't
anything there.
Believe everything about it that we believed
Why-
2 centuries
why?
ago, at say Napoleon's time, right? How did all that knowledge come about? How did all the change in that science
Well, it
develop?
really begins with Champollion and the deciphering of the Rosetta Stone.
All right,
So-
how was he able to do that against the mainstream?
There was no mainstream.
All right,
I'll get bigger
It was
jumps.
explained. There
This
was
is
no
my
mainstream. The
point.
mainstream has taken time to form, and it's very solid now.
Make joystick go
Scientists all sing
neutral.
from the same hymn
Is
book.
that what
You'll
this
find
thing is
very
telling
little
me?
disagreement
But
amongst
this
them on
is true
anything.
in every field. But somehow
Green
or
will
another,
kill, blue is
Einstein
safe.
managed to make an impact because he turned out to be right.
Well, I'm no
It's-
Einstein, and I don't know if
Joystick
I'm
go
right, but
neutral.
I'm going to continue to oppose that mainstream.
and-
Somebody
I
has
don't
to.
know. That's a valid comparison. Einstein and archaeology.
Oh.
Take paleoanthropology.
Oh,
I mean, it's a
okay.
completely different field now than a century
Thanks,
ago.
man.
How did that happen if no one ever accepts new ideas? They do. It
Ah.
happens all the time.
Well, they're being forced
Well,
to accept
do get
Göbekli
accepted.
Tepe, and that's a new idea.
But
Like,
that-
you know, when you were talking about things taking a long time, and what seems like a long time to us is really a blink of the eye in terms of archaeology.
Cool, man.
We're in the middle of that. We're essentially in the middle of that with things like Göbekli Tepe, with Forbes publishing an article about the Younger Dryas possibly being impacted by comets, and that being one of the causes of mass extinction.
Right, and when
These are all mainstream ideas
and
now.
when Alvarez proposed the impact hypothesis for the demise of the dinosaurs in 1980,
Oh, I made it.
It was ridiculed, but he turned out to be right, and then that became the accepted.
Right. It takes
Oh
time.
my
Well,
gosh.
but what was the
And
key
now
turning
people
point?
are challenging
Was
that.
it the key turning point, the finding of the crater?
Whoops.
That's what made the difference.
Yeah,
It's
so
kind of hard to argue with
so
that.
again, where's your crater?
Well, this is where perhaps we need to bring in our phone a friend. You know,
Okay.
Malcolm Lecomte, one of the Younger Dryas impact scientists. I mean, the point being made is the following. Firstly, that the primary impacts were on ice. There may have been as many as 4 impacts, that they were on the North American ice cap. Some craters have been suggested, for example, very deep holes in the Great Lakes. Other craters have been and will be looked at by the team in the coming months,
Nice
whether
music.
it includes the Corosol crater, the Quebec terrain, and so on and so forth. There are candidates. The crater has not been found yet, but I would be surprised
Oh, I
if a
keep
crater was
pushing-
easy
I
to
keep
find
not being neutral.
when the impact is on 2 miles.
Keep doing the
ice.
exact
And,
opposite of
one
what
the
you told me to
biggest
do.
strewn fields in the world, which is the Australian Tektite strewn field, there's no crater associated with that, but everybody accepts the impact proxies. There's enough of them to justify that, and that's what's going on around this impact hypothesis.
So, on a related question to that is not the lost civilizations and the demise of humans, but the
No!
extinction of North American mammals. So this has been
Oh, no.
debated
Oh, no.
before the impact hypothesis was proposed, and the competing
Upsliding
hypotheses were
cactus.
overhunting.
Oh,
Humans
what?
just hunted them to the point
Come
where not
on,
every
man.
last one,
That's
to the
such
point where the
garbage.
population numbers get too low and these species can't survive. Or climate change, or both. The climate change weakened the populations, then the humans came over.
It's good thing to know. Thanks, bro.
All right, so, and then the impact hypothesis is proposed.
Thanks, dude.
Okay, so this was debated, And it didn't fare that well because there were a lot of mammals and other species that didn't go extinct that you would expect from a massive impact like that. It would have wiped out. Why the selected species, the kinds of species that humans would hunt, are the ones that went extinct, whereas these others didn't.
Well, why
not
would
necessarily.
humans be hunting?
I think I'm starting with this game, eh? I would
Right.
not
There's no evidence
be able
that
to do
humans
any
humans
Kaizo
hunted the predators.
at all. I'd be
There's
so
evidence that
frustrated.
They hunted woolly mammoths, but it's a
Yeah.
very sparse. I mean, you have no more than a dozen sites that show association between human hunting and mammoths.
Remember when I
And a
was
lot of those,
arrogant, I'm like,
the Lubbock
oh,
Lake
don't you have anything
sites
harder
now
than
question what was
this
presumably
one?
was
I can't even beat it
previously,
friggin' level.
interpreted as being butchering marks on the mammoth remains. There are now being reinterpreted as possible.
I want to play like Grand
natural
Poo World
marks
2 and
on
stuff,
the-
man.
On the mammoth bones.
Oh,
But it's a
Oh,
big
why didn't they
stretch
spin
to
jump?
go from, okay, we've got the dozen
Learn to
sites
Kaizo.
where we have mammoth remains.
Yeah, I think I
and
tried that.
along
I
with those
couldn't, like,
mammoth
beat it.
remains, We find a few Clovis spear points.
I couldn't.
In
There was
two
a
or three
part where like I
cases, we
couldn't
actually
get
find,
by.
or they have found spear points
What?
embedded
Like,
within
come
the mammoth,
on,
like in the
man.
rib cage.
So
But it's a
fucking
very
long.
large stretch to go from there to say that 10 or 12 million woolly mammoths, or 4 species of mammoths on 4
Yeah,
continents,
come on.
were wiped out by Paleo
Load a neutral off a jump
hunters,
slide
probably
game.
bands
Yeah,
of no
you're
more than
right.
2 or 3
Oh, I would
dozen.
never.
Have you
With-
ever been to
Unless you
National
explained it.
Buffalo site?
Yes, but that's a good example because nowhere did that go anywhere close to exterminating the species of American
Yeah.
bison.
But each site has its own particular explanation. Could be hunting, could be a massive flood, earthquake, whatever. They all
Could be a
have
massive flood, yes, exactly. I
Yeah.
think there you
But-
and I
but-
would be in complete agreement.
What do you mean by massive? There's the global.
Go,
versus-
go!
So, for example, there's 52
Jesus
mammalian
Christ.
genera went extinct in South America. Why would they go extinct in South America? About the time that humans were moving
wow.
down there hunting.
The Younger Dryas
Versus-
impact hypothesis includes South America.
It
There were
does.
impacts there.
It does, and you know, again, the dating of the migration of humans into South America is
It's gonna be like
controversial
that,
at
eh?
this point. You know, there
gonna
is
be like
evidence that
that.
humans were there long before. You know, Paul Martin's idea of blitzkrieg requires that the animals be so stupid that they couldn't.
What?
They had no adaptive capabilities to the appearance of a new predatory species. But what is being demonstrated from examining the lifeways of the Paleo-Indian peoples is
No.
that they had very diversified diets, and they were hunter-gatherers. Now, why would they be choosing the largest, most dangerous animals to hunt when they had such a proliferation of other smaller animals? We know that they were foraging. We know that they were eating seafood. There was and fishing, because all of this is being found in the camps.
What? Like,
And
why?
it certainly doesn't
too
explain
dumb,
the
man.
extermination of, you know, the cave bears, the short-faced bears, the camelops, the giant beavers, the giant armadillos, the American Pleistocene lion, the ground sloths that were the size of giraffes. 4 species of proboscideans, meaning mammoths, extinct on
what?
4 continents. And to me, like, wait a second. We cannot invoke a modern example to say, well, here
How about
is.
the Maori?
Well, that's controversial also.
I mean, they drove the
Come on.
birds extinct in
Hast eagle.
Well,
Yeah.
that's an assumption
Humans-
there. That
humans
if you
got-
ask the
There's a
Maori
big difference
themselves,
between that and people with atlatls killing off all the saber-toothed tigers. But here's another answer to one of your questions. You were saying, like, why would some of the animals be alive? Well, we know that
Like, I hate
the
this stupid
asteroid
game.
that killed the dinosaurs 65 million years ago didn't kill everything.
Right.
right?
And that is a
The
massive
checkout is
impact,
broken?
far bigger than anything we're talking
Oh,
about. and
sorry,
many, many
dude. I'm
animals
sorry to hear
survive
that, dude.
So we don't know
That's
why
too
things
bad.
survive and why they don't. It could be proximity
sorry
to
to
the
hear, dude.
impact.
Right.
It could be that their food source wasn't removed. It could be that their predators were wiped out and they managed to survive. I mean, there's a lot of animals that are alive today in this continent. Like, for instance, a pronghorn antelope. Pronghorn antelope. Dan Flores, who's a wildlife historian, wrote an amazing book on it. And when he was talking about the
Oh, come
American
on.
savanna during, like 15,000 plus years ago, there was all sorts of crazy animals millions of years ago that were like cheetahs that were running down animals at extreme speeds, which is the reason why pronghorn antelopes can run so much faster than any of their current predators. Something much faster than them was killing them, and that was wiped
for
out.
fuck's
But they
sake.
managed to make it. One of the reasons why they probably managed to make it is because their predators were wiped out. It's not an even.
And
That's
another
right.
point, Michael. If it's overkill, it's intriguing that the overkill
I'm sorry to hear that,
occurs,
dude.
precisely in the Younger Dryas window, because I think you'd agree that now the whole story of the peopling of the Americas is pretty much up for grabs. I mean, Clovis first was the dominant model for a very long time, and under that model, we're to envisage these Clovis hunters coming in across the Bering Land Bridge, going down the ice-free corridor, and then in like 800 years, with
I hate
their
this game.
sophisticated fluted points, they wipe out all the mammoths in North America. But now we know that humans have been coexisting and butchering mammoths, coexisting with mammoths for thousands of years before that, possibly tens of thousands of years before
You
that.
mean from evidence in Siberia?
I don't only mean from evidence in Siberia. I mean, I can cite you from Nature magazine just recently. Huge number. I don't think the Yukon is in Siberia, is it?
No.
Like,
I think the
why?
Yukon's in North America. Jacques Cinq-Mars, the excavator of the Bluefish Caves in the Yukon, back in the 1970s was proposing that human beings had been in the Americas at least 24,000 years ago. His reputation was utterly destroyed. His research funding was withdrawn.
Like, why?
He was given no access to grants. He wasn't able to do his work. He was heavily penalized and punished by the community. And now, just a few weeks ago, we have the Smithsonian coming out and saying, sorry, we got it wrong. Jacques Cinq-Mars was right all along. And Tom Dillahay, with his work in Monteverde,
Insane.
the shit that he had to take.
Why?
I think we're in a very interesting time. The peopling of the Americas is really a paradigm that has absolutely been overthrown. The notion of
I
Clovis
disagree.
first. Well, you disagree with Smithsonian then, which is fine. I do
No,
too.
the Mesa Verde.
You're trying to fast food? Okay, man.
It's
Sorry, dude.
It's an isolated site.
Sure, buddy.
Where are all the sites between Clovis and Monteverde?
Do you honestly
thousands
think
of
Clovis
miles
was still
for-
first?
For thousands and thousands of years.
Come on, Michael.
And
Do you
there's
think
no-
Clovis was
hang
still
on.
first?
Where are all the people between Clovis and Monteverde?
Not my problem.
It is your problem.
No,
'cause
it's
you're
not
the
my
one-
problem. They're
Yeah.
there in Monteverde and they're there in North America.
Okay,
Go
so
figure.
what's more likely? That
Go figure why there's a
there's
Denisovan trace in
missing-
South American Indians and not in
Okay,
North American
it's like
Indians.
it's like the nature paper I brought
Maybe
up
people
earlier,
crossed the ocean.
that there were Neanderthals or humans in San Diego 130,000 years ago. Okay, but when you look at that, okay, so they have mammoth bones. It looks like they might have been broken in the length, okay, and the tools, but they're not. Okay, the tools.
We're
they're
kind of
just big-
changing subjects here, though.
Well, no.
You're trying to quibble the evidence of
Yeah.
earlier human presence.
That's right.
You're trying to quibble it.
Well, not quibble.
Well, you're quibbling it. You're quibbling it, and you've got every right to
You're
challenge
asking
it.
What are
why-
you saying very specifically that's opposing what he just said?
The reason archaeologists don't accept earlier than Clovis, say earlier
they
than
do.
about 13,000,
They
14,000
do. It's
years.
massively
No.
accepted.
Like say Mesa Verde, for example.
Okay, I have to bring up an image. at
Why
this
don't
point.
they accept Mesa Verde?
They do accept Mesa Verde.
As a,
It is accepted
Michael,
now.
are you sure about this?
As what, 24,000 years?
15 plus, possibly significantly,
Yeah, okay, so
significantly
15,
older.
So 15 is kind of the outside of the window that humans came across the Bering Strait. That's possible. Not 24,000
Did you open
years.
Clovis first?
Not 130,000 years ago. Now, if it turns out that nature paper is right and that's confirmed, then that does overturn the mainstream theory for sure.
But why would you? This is not like your field of study. Why would
So-
you argue against the nature
So let's
paper?
Okay, I'll just give you.
Let's quote the
don't.
Smithsonian.
I ask professionals. that study
Smithsonian,
this,
slide
what they
number
think.
5. Today, decades later, the Clovis first model has collapsed. Okay, based on dozens of new studies, we now know that pre-Clovis peoples slaughtered mastodons in Washington state, dined on desert parsley in Oregon, made all-purpose stone tools that were Ice Age version of the
Yeah,
X-Acto
between
blade.
13,000 and that's not.
No, look at this.
All
It says,
between
no, it
that, and
says
then
13
24,000 years down at the bottom, Michael, are you saying the Smithsonian are wrong on this?
Michael, you're jumping to
Very
conclusions
probably.
before you even read that. You want to be right so bad that you didn't read the part and other
It isn't
animals
me.
there.
Look, I
Well,
don't
hold
have
on a second. Confirming that humans had butchered horses and other animals there 24,000 years ago. It says it right there, and you are arguing against it without even reading it, which means you want to be right.
No.
No, that's absolutely
No,
what's going
because
on.
I have no dog in this fight.
Well, why
I-
didn't
I
you read
don't
that whole
care.
thing
I
before
don't
you
care.
started pointing at you being
You
correct?
published Skeptic magazine and you have no dog in the fight?
You're asking me why don't mainstream archaeologists accept
You should be skeptical of
dates
Clovis
in the
first.
tens of thousands? Okay, call it whatever you want. It goes back 11, 13,
But what do you think
15.
about what that says? That there's evidence they butchered horses 24,000 years ago.
Okay, I would have to check the site on it. I haven't seen this article.
Well, now that you have seen it.
Not my problem.
Okay,
Now that
not
you
my
have
problem
seen
either.
it, you
Well, it
said-
is your
but
problem
you were
because you're the
saying that there's no
skeptic and you're
evidence.
here opposing this and you're saying there's no evidence. You haven't even read the
I'm not
fucking
a-
article.
Okay, I'm not opposing anything. I'm saying
You certainly
this
are.
is the reason why scientists accept these dates here, because there's lots and lots of evidence for
That is scientists.
10,000, 11,000, 12,000.
That is
That is
Then
scientists.
you find one person that says 24,000. Another one, like 2 weeks ago,
This is
that
not
says
one person. This
and-
is very
and then another
disappointing that you're
paper- No, no,
arguing this
hang on.
without really doing any research about
And
it.
then I
The
just-
article is
I
titled
opened-
"What
Joe,
Happens When an Archaeologist Challenges Mainstream Thinking."
And doesn't this-
that's
doesn't
in the
this-
Smithsonian in the month of March.
Okay,
Jacques Cinq-Mars, it was a brutal experience. Something that Cinq-Mars once likened to the Spanish Inquisition. At conferences, audiences paid little heed to his presentation, giving short shrift to the evidence, etc., etc., etc. The result was always the same. When he proposed that Bluefish Caves was 24,000 years old, it was not accepted. What the Smithsonian are saying is now, this is accepted. You need to get up to speed with the data, Michael.
Okay, my archaeology friends like Jared Diamond, who I just checked with on this, who's at UCLA.
Well, he certainly has a dog in the fight.
And he just says, here's the problem. For 50 years, people propose pre-Clovis examples or sites or evidence. They never hold up. They always, the dating turned out to be incorrect. The carbon-14 was not calibrated right. There was this, there was that. They never hold up. It's
So
not
essentially, you're
Yeah, you
quoting a
quibbled it away
friend.
for 50 years.
Well,
You're quoting a friend who says the evidence hasn't held up before. Instead of quoting these articles with these scientists who are talking about the data that's showing that human beings butchered horses 24,000 years ago, you're disputing it just because you talked to a friend.
I'm saying that has to be confirmed. That particular
But
site.
why
that
argue
date-
against it?
I'm not arguing
You
against it.
certainly were.
No, I'm just saying that
Wasn't
this
he?
is this
Am
is
I
the-
wrong?
I feel you were arguing against it and saying that it's not the case and
I don't
quibbling
know.
it, and you
I
seem
don't
to
know.
be,
No,
if
no.
I'm correct, you seem to be a Clovis first advocate. Put your reputation on the line and say you
Okay,
advocate Clovis
I'm
first.
not going to put a label on it. I'm going to say in the latest evidence that overwhelmingly shows humans coming across the Siberian Straits into North America 11, 12, 13, 14, 15,000 years ago.
That they definitely did then. They definitely
And-
did then.
and now what-
did they before?
What could push it back much earlier would be if they came by boat.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so like where I live in Santa Barbara, there are sites on the Channel Islands that go back 11, 12,000 years ago. And they came by boat. Now the problem is well, if they lived on the shores, which is where the good fishing and eating is, those are underwater. And short of doing good underwater archaeology, which is hard to do and expensive, and most of it's probably gone, we may never know.
It's one of my beefs with archaeology actually is that 10 million square miles of the planet that were above water during the
Right.
Ice Age are underwater now, and marine archaeology is still mainly looking at shipwrecks. You know.
Well, okay. They do that because it's like where the light is.
It leaves a big unanswered question. At any rate, so for the record, can I at least say that you completely oppose the Smithsonian's position on this, that there has been no paradigm shift?
I will look at this. I haven't seen this Smithsonian thing. All right, I'm not aware of the horse find from 24,000 years ago. I am aware of the 130,000 year date from the Nature paper.
I have a slide on that too.
And if okay,
Well, I think the
show
major
show the
speculation-
stone tools. They're nothing like Clovis points. It's just a big hand rock that might have been used. It might have been random.
Sorry, a big hand rock is
Yeah,
all
look-
there is before 13,000 years ago?
No, I'm talking about the 130,000-year-old
Oh,
site.
130,000
Oh, you're talking
year old
about the
site.
San Diego thing. Yeah.
We don't need to talk about that.
Why?
That raises interesting questions. Was it Neanderthals? Was it Denisovans? Was it anatomically modern
Oh.
humans
Or
130,000
is
years
it a
ago? It raises
misdated
interesting
site?
questions.
Or
but,
is it a
but-
misinterpreted site because they aren't
but
stone
I'm
tools?
not
they're just
pinning.
rocks.
I'm not pinning anything to that. I'm
Well,
just. I'm saying yes. That
The
report.
question
that
is not
report was
necessarily
published in Nature.
just about the stone tools. It's about how the bones were shattered.
back.
And they believe the bones were shattered deliberately, indicating that someone was trying to get at the marrow,
Maybe.
indicating...
Or-
yeah, maybe.
Or a tractor rolled over it, a couple of years ago.
Oh,
no,
this
that's
hot
not-
chocolate story, dude.
No,
Well,
no,
that's
no
one
one,
of the-
no one had excavated. That's just speculation on your part.
Immediately,
No,
this
not my
find.
part. This was one of the.
Immediately, the
responses.
find has been
Very back,
quibbled
needs washing.
by the archaeological mainstream. Of course, it's been published by the archaeological mainstream too, and the rest of the mainstream is quibbling
It's
it.
a-
And we
it's
will
a
see how
mystery.
that
But I
plays
thought you
out.
said that can't happen.
We will say what can't happen.
That the mainstream won't allow, radical ideas. To
Nature
challenge
published it, and the
Right.
idea is being quibbled.
And here the Smithsonian
Nature
publishes,
certainly
so
would not.
apparently it's okay.
Nature certainly would not have published it if the evidence were not strong. I accept that. Nature's not in the business of publishing, fringy stuff. It is a radical proposal, but it's strong enough to justify publication in Nature. What's interesting to me is that the immediate reaction of the archaeological community is not say, well, what could this mean? Let's look into the implications of this. I mean, if there were Neanderthals or Denisovans in North America 130,000 years ago, we have a whole new scenario building here that really should interest everyone.
Yeah,
instead
really,
of
that
the
seems
first
weird.
reaction is let's destroy this because
Sounds
it's really
strange.
annoying. Let's get rid of it. Let's prove it's wrong. Let's suggest that it was a fucking bulldozer or something like that. Maybe it was. I don't know. The work hasn't been done yet. But that instant sort of it's almost like an
It's
immune
weird, man.
response to an idea
Oh
that
my
doesn't
gosh.
fit into the prevailing paradigm. But the other work, the work in South America, the Bluefish Caves work, that's really not controversial anymore. That's very widely accepted. Clovis First is a discredited and abandoned position. And I have something else to ask you, actually, concerning genetics and DNA. I'm sure you're well up on that. I mean, can you explain why we have a strong signal of Denisovan DNA in certain groups of South American Indians and in Australian Aborigines and Melanesians, but that Denisovan DNA doesn't crop up in North American Indians? How would we explain that if they all came through the Bering Strait?
I have no idea.
Well, it could be boats.
But I mean, this just
Oh
happens
my
to be something I
God.
don't know anything about.
Okay.
So part of the problem of even doing this is that
Was your idea?
well, here we are talking. This is good. But part of the risk is that you're going to find something I don't happen to know about, and then it's like, you see, I made my point. What point? That okay? So, in like the history of the peopling of America, that area, there's always somebody that comes in with it's not Clovis, it's this, it's that, and rarely do they last. Why? The dates were miscalibrated or whatever. It's not just that scientists are closed-minded, although they can be. It's that the convergence of evidence isn't strong enough to overturn the mainstream theory. So, but it does happen. Maybe there are multiple migrations into North America, and we just don't have all the sites. But when somebody comes up with a site like that's tens of thousands of years earlier than all the others that are accepted here, and it's over here, where are all the sites in between? It's like the gap, 5,000-year gap with the Egyptian complex. Where are the sites? If it's true, they didn't fly there. So how'd they get there?
Well,
and there must be a trail somewhere that we could find, unless they came by boat. And then that's
shit.
Or unless you're
Oh
dealing
my
with 24,000
goodness.
years ago and there's not much evidence to find.
maybe.
But if they came by boat, then
I'm
that
really hyped
clearly
on that.
implies they had navigational skills. They had the ability to build boats and find their way across the ocean. And
Big
Well,
ocean,
you could do the coast. That's not quite as. You don't need a big ocean going.
But
you don't need an ocean going, but
I mean, this is
there's
one
also
hypothesis that that's proposed is that they came across by boat, just following the shore.
The same area as the
You're-
Bering Strait.
Yeah, you're just 100 feet offshore. You
Right.
go in and
But most likely both, right?
And
And one of
both.
the issues,
Yeah.
of course, was the short-faced bear was so formidable, according to Dan Flores, that it would have been a huge impediment for people crossing on foot anyway. And the short-faced bear went extinct right around the time we see more evidence of human beings entering in. But why did it go extinct? That's the big question.
Well, you have to add that to the list of predators that there would have been no reason for humans to have been hunting.
Yeah, well,
And-
that's an enormous animal.
So there's sort of two factors that go on here. There's positive evidence in favor of a hypothesis, then there's negative evidence against the mainstream hypothesis. And you really need both. So it's not enough to just say, I don't accept the evidence for here. That's fine. Scientists do that all the time.
What evidence? Well, let's speak in
come
specifics
on,
because you keep
dude.
doing this. You keep saying, well, they find things, and it turns out, no, that's not true. And then you're
the
essentially like
closest thing.
proving your point of being a skeptic without having any real cases.
Well,
You just keep saying
Right
this,
up there, then.
but no, you're not.
Start
you can't say
stream.
all the cases. If you don't
Good
want
luck
to
on this,
cite
yo.
anything
Thanks, bro.
specifically, don't
Thanks,
keep
man.
bringing up
Thanks,
things
homie.
that are refuted because you don't have anything.
Thanks,
to
dude. I
point
appreciate
to.
that.
So
Thanks
you're
to
just
bits,
muddying
too.
the water.
It's
Okay,
nice
you're
to
essentially
you.
close.
Those skills get really stupid when they're falling, too.
Gobekli Tepe, the pyramid.
Yeah, I bet.
All of these.
What's been disproven?
No, okay, making a slightly different point.
That's the problem.
Thanks, man. Yo,
is that
thanks
you're
for being
not
here.
addressing
I was hoping
the
you'd be
actual
here. That'd
issues
be
we're
amazing.
talking about. You muddy the water by
Make
saying
him teleport
things
to
have
the
been
Mexico.
tossed out the
Oh,
window.
yeah.
So
I know
we
what
have
you
to be
mean.
careful here and toss these things out the
I
window
know
as
what
well.
you mean.
A toss out. Just contemplate them, published in Nature, for example. So let's watch
Yeah,
what
Mega
happens
Man
to
has
the
something like that, too.
hypothesis. If it holds up, and there's other sites that are dated that way, and so on and so
God.
forth, and that
On
will be
NES.
truly revolutionary, and scientists would accept it. They
You
would.
see, the problem is that when you have a very strong paradigm like Clovis First, which really
Sweet.
dominates American archaeology, prehistoric
Thanks, homie.
archaeology for a very long period,
This
it's
is fun though,
difficult-
man.
It's difficult from a career point of view for archaeologists to come up and propose alternative sites. Those who did, like Tom Dinahay, like Jacques Cinq-Mars, paid a very heavy price for so doing. So the incentive to go looking for older stuff than Clovis is extremely low in the archaeological community as a result of this ferocious reaction
Like,
that went
come
on for
on, man.
30 or 40 or even 50 years.
So
You know,
fucking low.
I mean, also consider the Valsequillo excavations in Mexico, where there was a suggestion of some sort of human presence 230,000 years ago. I mean, that good archaeology, but it was
I'm actually
utterly
probably gonna
dismissed,
sign
and
off
the
pretty soon.
archaeologists involved were ruined.
In like
for
maybe
getting
5 minutes
involved
or
in that.
less.
It's hard to see how that's a profession
be
that
honest.
encourages people to think outside the box.
Do
When
you know,
careers get ruined
yeah.
and research funding gets withdrawn for an idea that doesn't fit the current mainstream
Well, certainly
hypothesis.
we don't like to think that scientists do that. They do that. Are you familiar with Michael Cramo's book, Forbidden Archaeology?
I know Michael. Yeah.
Okay. So, now,
But come on,
and he
man.
makes, in my mind, as compelling a case as you do. And for his humans were here tens of millions of years ago. And, his book is, 900 pages long.
Tens of millions?
Yeah, tens of millions, okay? And he's a Hindu. So his idea is, this sort of long recycling and
But what evidence is it based on
well,
for tens
okay,
of millions of
it's-
years?
it's-
I'm not here to defend Michael Cremo or to have a discussion about Michael Cremo. That's not why I'm sitting at this
I
table.
understand, but my point is that
Michael Cremo is not me.
that's right. So, but
I've
there's
seen you play
lots
this
of
one, man.
alternative archaeology is where I began. There's lots of alternative archaeology books and
Right, but what
theories about
evidence is
this.
there that supports that?
Maybe I've seen you
So
speed
why are
run
you
it.
Well,
bringing
but-
up that when there's
but-
evidence that he's
Oh,
bringing
no.
up?
No, Cramo's evidence is similar to his. It's
Why?
mostly negative evidence that I don't accept the date of this. There is this peculiar sort of footprint-looking thing in the mud.
Cremo
Uh-huh.
refers
Human.
specifically to the knowledge filter. The most useful thing about that book is the publication of reports, archaeological reports, which are no longer available to the public, which do suggest an alternative point of view. I would say it's a very useful
Wait,
book to
what?
read. Beyond that, I have nothing to say.
Oh, we gotta throw it in the
Yeah,
air.
but
I
that's
get
not
it now.
necessarily true. You're saying his only evidence. I mean, he's pointing to like some pretty significant evidence. Like the Sphinx thing
Oh my
is a
gosh.
geologist from Boston University proposed this because
Oh,
of
why
water
not?
erosion. Because of water erosion that could have only been done by thousands of years of rainfall, in his opinion, as a qualified
Okay,
geologist.
alright, and-
Like that's not a lack of evidence.
I understand, but why do no other geologists or archaeologists
There are
accept
other.
it?
No,
Well,
that's not true.
Actually, they do. And I've had multiple conversations with Robert where he has cited the fact that he has gotten a considerable body of support from other geologists, not from Egyptologists, but from geologists who do recognize the effects of severe water erosion on limestone, carbonate rocks, and that's what we have there. We have a severe water erosion that appears and is preserved on the quarry walls around the Sphinx. The Sphinx itself, as Graham said, is difficult to ascertain because of all of the reconstruction that has gone on. But the quarry walls, which would have once had the very distinct stepped profile of a typical quarry, no longer have that. I mean, they have a textbook profile, parabolic profile that would be consistent with sheet flooding, which would be both dissolution because carbonate rocks dissolve in acidic waters,
come
and
on,
what's called
man.
corrosion, which would be the effects of water loaded with sand sediment, which would make it very rough. So if you've got the sand sediment flowing over the edge of what would have been a quarry wall, what you're going to end up with is a smoothing off of the rough corners, and the final result would be a very rounded profile like you see there. And you would also see where the fissures in the rock would be selectively widened and opened by the water penetrating those fissures. I mean, it has all of the earmarks of a very textbook case of water erosion.
Don't you think it's very disingenuous comparing that to someone who thinks that human beings have been here for tens of millions of years with no evidence to support it whatsoever?
Well, he doesn't say, of course, he doesn't say he has no evidence. He has a 900-page book full of evidence. It's the quality of the evidence. When
What
you
about
say
the quality of that evidence?
If it was that good, we're not geologists sitting here. If it was that good, why don't geologists look at it and go, he's right?
But they
Well,
do.
they do. That's
You're
the
not
point.
listening.
They do. They all do.
No, they
Some
don't
do.
all do.
Okay,
Some
why?
geologists who
Yes.
some geologists who work with Egyptologists say that shock is wrong.
Okay, we have a geologist on the line. Why don't we ask him? Mark.
Well, we can have one guy's opinion. We could also have other guys' opinions that we can get from
I mean,
other
this matter
sources.
has been in the
What does that
public
have to do?
domain since 1992. It hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Schock's argument that we are looking at precipitation-induced weathering on the Sphinx has not been debunked. It has been opposed. It has been disagreed with. But that is different from saying it's debunked, and Schock stays solid and strong on that issue. He is a credentialed geologist. He is a professor of geology at the University of Boston. He has a right to speak out about this, and he stated his view. I happen to find his view very interesting, especially since it correlates with what I regard as the interesting astronomy of the site. I think that site has origins that do go back into the Young Dryas. That's my opinion. I've stated it many times, and I've presented the evidence that I writes that opinion. You and your colleagues
did
are
speedrun
absolutely
this,
at liberty to
Ninja, I
disagree if you
remember
do.
now.
You don't think it's disingenuous to compare that to someone who says something that
Or play
defies
through
our
it or
current
something?
understanding of human beings and the actual evolution of humans?
Okay.
Like, you're talking about someone who's saying that human beings are how many millions of years old?
Tens of millions.
Tens of millions. Well, we know for a fact, right? As far if you
Yep.
pay attention to evolution,
Right.
right? But
Right.
we weren't even
but
humans
Joe,
a million years ago, correct?
I mean, there are creationists who
Come
think.
on.
okay, but
All right.
we're not talking about them. We're talking about Graham Hancock.
I know. But my point was that, so here you have the mainstream scientists, and so it's like there's Graham, he seems so reasonable, but there's 50 like him, and each of them thinks that they're right. They're not.
There's your language. He seems so
Wow.
reasonable.
Right.
So you're right there. You're accusing me of dissimulation.
And you're
I
saying there's
seem reasonable,
50
but
like him.
the subtext is that I'm not, and then there's 50 like me.
This is more
What a
strong, man.
patronizing, arrogant,
No, I don't mean it to-
deeply unpleasant, and personal approach.
Graham, I'm sorry, I didn't mean it to sound like that. I really don't.
Okay.
Okay, I have a larger point. That
Apology
I think I'm
accepted.
done.
Yep,
I think I'm
but
done playing for tonight.
when you're faced with a bunch of different alternative theories that are coming in, and it's not, it's a, take
Thanks for
physics.
being here,
I mean,
Ninja,
every
Russ,
physicist,
and
like you just had
Lurkers.
Lawrence Krauss. He gets these letters daily of people saying, I think I figured out why Einstein was wrong. And he can't address them all. And they're smart people, they're thoughtful people, they really believe it. What do you do with that? That's my point.
I feel
Like,
that's not
come
my
on,
problem.
no,
And
it's
if
like,
there are
no,
alternative
it's like,
other alternative theories, that's not my
Thank you,
problem either.
Ninja.
It's
Thank
the problem
you,
that the
Russ,
mainstream
for
sort
being
it
here.
out and figure which to pay
well,
attention
And
to
sign
and which
off.
not.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, I'm suspicious of the whole idea of the mainstream because even looking in the mainstream, you find so many divergent points of
Yeah.
view that I think that's basically a fiction. That there is this mainstream that has arrived at this consensus, and that there are no ulterior motives there, and that there are no dogmas that are being perpetuated there. You know, I mean, I look at a lot of the geological stuff and realize that there are many different points of view. When we get to talk about these floods at the end of the last ice age, there are many divergent points of view. There is what could be considered the mainstream, yet even that has multiple interpretations. And the same with the comet idea. You know, I mean, I don't know what constitutes the mainstream there because there have been a group that has opposed it at every turn, but at the same time, the group that accepts the comet hypothesis has continued to grow. In fact, there's even a number of individuals involved that set out specifically to disprove it or discredit it, who are now basically on board. And it has grown from being a small handful of scientists to there are now 63 scientists from